Heathers, A Novel Approach to Cinema by John Ross Bowie. Edited by Howie. Read by Mae Zurita. Who is going to want to read a book about heathers? It's not the sort of film that scholars around the world have celebrated. But neither is it so left field that it has never been critically written about before. It is neither Battleship Potomac nor Biodome. The official Heathers fan site, heathersfilm.tripod.com, has, as of this writing, not been updated since 1999. Why am I spending all this time on such a niche project, I ask myself? I have kids to feed, for fuck's sake. So I took a respite from self-doubt to poke around on some of the political websites to which I am sadly addicted. The lead on Fire Dog Lake, a funny lefty blog founded by columnist and ex-film producer Jane Hampshire, was on former Colorado Congressman Tom Tancredo, who'd just spoken at the National Tea Party Convention. In a subsequent interview with Dutch newspaper NRC Huntsevblad, he'd cast barbs at Sarah Palin. I really don't have this feeling that she's presidential. And John McCain, nasty, mean, particularly unstable. The Fire Dog Lake columnist, who goes by the name Vatigir, had this to say about Representative Tancredo. Oh snap! Who died and left Tancredo Heather Chandler's red scrunchie? That last phrase was helpfully hyperlinked to Heathers' IMDb page for the benefit of the reader who didn't respond to the reference with a smug chuckle. Smug, but surprised. It was a reference to a cult movie 21 years later after the film's release. A cult film, which, by any estimation, tanked in its initial distribution. The same IMDb page indicates that the film still has not made its money back. This is likely untrue, what with video rentals and such, though difficult to confirm since the production company is now defunct. That production company, New World Pictures, which had been founded a decade before by Roger Corman, went under after one more film, with a similar box office performance. Yet, here it is, reference on a progressive political blog that, after analyzing Tancredo's questionable conservative credentials, further wonders, I guess we'll have to wait and see whether the Tea Party bestows the red scrunchie on someone more politically pure. Apparently, given its status as a catchphrase in the popular lexicon, I will not have to spend any time discussing the symbolism of Heather Chandler's red scrunchie. If you put 3 or more people in a room, there will eventually be gossip, politics, coalition building, and backstabbing. And if there is gossip, politics, coalition building, and backstabbing, there will be a connection to Heathers. A vibrant and vicious satire that speaks not just to me, but to anyone who steps back a little and looks at the weird and horrible things that people do to each other. In politics, in show business, in families. And the universality of Heathers is the subject of this book, as well as how it got deeper under the skin of a kid growing up 500 huge miles away from the movie's setting among the suburban lawns of Ohio. The natural answer to the myriad of problems life has given me. Built in the 1920s, it was a dank, sooty, 6-story building with an American flag waving on its roof, until an ex-girlfriend of mine stole the flag. There was a coal-building furnace in the basement, which a few students ever saw, but those of us who did were certain that the school was built on a, if not the, mouth of hell. Somebody once took a dump right in the middle of the northwest stairwell, and it sat there for hours. Having said all that, I still enjoyed high school quite a bit. Bayard Rustin High School for the Humanities, located in the Chelsea district of Manhattan, is named for the prominent gay socialist civil rights leader, and was, at the time of my attendance, one of the most ethnically diverse schools in New York City. We didn't have a football team, few schools in the city do. Where would they practice? None of the kids had that suburban status symbol, the car. Where would they park? And while I was certainly not among the beautiful people who went clubbing at the Tunnel or Limelight, I had friends, felt a sense of community, and avoided violence for the most part. More on that later. In the 10th grade, I had my first serious girlfriend, to whom I lost my virginity the following summer, and had girlfriends of varying degrees of seriousness thereafter. I didn't go dancing, but I went to see bands at the clubs like the Ritz and the CBGB pretty religiously, from which I came home at ridiculously late hours. I have vivid memories walking down 44th Street at 3 a.m. when the only other life on the street would be a sewer rat and a Hasid getting a Hummer from a boo-wigged hooker, probably a guy. My mom fought these late excesses with curfews. I pushed and pushed until they just gradually evaporated. My huge bargaining chip in these negotiations was that I didn't drink, and was in fact aggressively, obnoxiously, self-righteously, straight-edged. So, my hours were crazy, terrifying in hindsight, especially now that I have kids of my own, but I never came home drunk or high, which bought me a lot of leeway. For a big chunk of the 10th grade, I wore a back brace to arrest my kyphoscoliosis. Not correct, mind you, merely arrest. Honor student? Think you know. I spent far too much time listening to records and working on stage crew to hold down anything better than a B to C average. I played no sports. I passed gym solely by making the teacher laugh. Mr. Padroni admired my Kiatanesque, both Buster and Diane, pratfalls, as I attempted to leap over the pommel horse, and gamely gave me a B. Thanks, Mr. Padroni, wherever you are. Wait a second. You got fired for messing around with some of the more athletic boys, and that's why I've changed your name for the purposes of the story? Well, that's just as well. So yes, in the national nomenclature of the time, probably a nerd, sure, but these tidy classifications didn't seem to apply in New York. Sure, I was nerdy, but girls would have sex with me. Sure, girls would have sex with me, but I was the guy who fixed the VCR when it died in class. Sure, I was the guy who fixed the VCR, but I was cordial with a lot of the popular kids, the children of respected actors and artists, stunning girls in black tights, athletic guys who dressed in Benetton chic. My key social network was stage crew. I had joined in the 10th grade, drawn to this specialized corps that got to miss classes, wear cool walkie-talkies, and carry keys that could open most of the rooms in the building. Enter Patricia, also on stage crew. Bookish, thick, busty, and awkward. We fell in love, had a weird, sweaty, virginity-extinguishing sex while watching all of things The Wanderers, which features a teen pregnancy. She was infinitely smarter than I was, and history would bear this out when she went to Brown and I went to Ithaca. But at the time, she was prone to horrible mood swings and long, rambling love letters, tearful apologies, and all the other things that make a girl irresistible to a certain type of guy who thinks romance is supposed to hurt. Our song was the Beatles' Dear Prudence, a musical red flag if there ever was one. She finally had to fuck somebody else to end our relationship, which was one of those relationships that just refused to die. She graduated at the end of my sophomore year, because your narrator was a player who dated seniors, provided they were clinically depressives. By 11th grade, I was really involved with the crew, and I ascended to the rank of assistant stage manager. That's the year I met Heather number 1. This is not a metaphor. She was actually named Heather, who at the time was a Mormon, so we didn't have sex, but I do remember making out during Singing in the Rain. No, wait. It's a Wonderful Life. She was a voracious reader, and like me, was, in some ways, different just for the sake of being different. She had arbitrary, sartorial rules, such as the belief that everyone should own one really ugly vest. She loved the Dead Milkmen. We went to see Goofy, Frankie, and Annette retread Back to the Beach on our first date. I was a nerd in love. The show we put on that year was Fiddler on the Roof, which required massive technical maneuvering. Tevi's house flown into the rafters, a massive lighting rejiggering in order to create the proper atmosphere for the dream sequence in Act 1. We even considered using body mics, but we dropped them during Tech Week because of all the interference. The school's armed security guards had walkie-talkies that fizzled into Auntie Kevin's conversations. We also ran all the school's assemblies, which could be a daunting amount of work, and when I ran out to adjust the microphone, I was swiftly called nerd by my less charitable classmates. That hurt so much that I even quit the gig for a while, but couldn't find anything to approximate the high of opening night. The adrenaline and serotonin rushing in as, surrounded by concupiscent, overly made-up teenagers, you watch your set creation being lowered from the flies. That was my high school. Heightened, colorful, like every high school, only more so. Heather number 1 broke my heart late junior year. We were in different places. Her being, I'm about to graduate from high school and I need my space. And my being, can I crawl inside your tweed overcoat and stay there? The breakup really smarted. There was a special kind of intensity to nerd love. All high school relationships have an element of you and me against the world. But when the two participants view themselves as outsiders anyways, it's natural-born killers with milder editing. Walking down 59th Street near the park one time, we passed two really well-dressed girls. Black leggings under minis, hoop earrings, Elaine from Seinfeld, walls of moosed hair, sitting on a park bench, not bothering anyone. Heather 1 and I both said, "Japs," under our breath, and the two girls heard us and lashed out with, "Nerds!" And you know what? Totally within their rights. Some total fucking strangers had made a snobbish and frankly anti-Semitic remark. Heather 1 and I are lucky we didn't get our asses kicked. And make no mistake, two Jewish American princesses girls could absolutely have kicked my ass. But it was that same adversarial ass against the world relationship, and I think this is pretty common, that made me feel shipwrecked when my partner, in contempt, left. I hibernated a little until working up the courage to ask out Heather number 2. Again, her real name. She was a looker who divided her time between an awesome brownstone in East Village and a home in Connecticut. She had been off limits for all high school, pursued by many, and consistently rebuffing all. Dating a guy from Connecticut who happened to be a football player, she detested having him dismissed as a jock, and I'll honor her preference here. They had broken up around New Year's, and slowly, steadily, we became an item. Clearly, she was working through some sort of, what's the absolute polar opposite of a guy from Connecticut who plays football thing, and there I was, scrawny, bespectacled, long-haired, and walking around with Jim Carroll's 4 Centuries in my backpack. Sure, she wouldn't tell anyone about us, but people knew, and I really didn't care about New York when you're 17 and crazy about a girl in the shiniest place on earth. It's like 10 Oz's. People ask me all the time what it was like to grow up in New York City for years. I wasn't sure what to say until I asked them what it was like growing up in Swampscott, Massachusetts, or Chillicothe, Illinois. And then I realized, wow, I guess taking a date to the opera when you're in high school is pretty weird. And it's pretty weird that I was 30 before I learned how to drive. And I guess that story about Hasid and the tranny hooker doesn't really tap into a universal nerve. But yeah, I took Heather's to the opera. My dad had season tickets, couldn't use this pair for Rigoletto, and to see Our Town on Broadway. Spalding Gray was the stage manager. And we walked through Central Park in the crisp new snow, and nobody bothered us. Life was great. While thumbing through my new issue of American Film, your narrator had a subscription, yet still had a girlfriend. Amazing. I was struck by an article about a dark high school comedy that had been kind of a big hit at the Sundance Film Festival. A great idea and a funny title. I was between allowances and jobless at the time, and she had a job at the Gap on St. Mark's. So, actually, Heather number 2 took me to see Heather's. God damn, will somebody tell me why I read these spy novels? Synopsis and origins of Michael Lehman's Heather's, 1989. When the film shows up late at night on IFC, it's summarized as follows. Cool Veronica and her quirky boyfriend topple a high school trio of 2 cool Heathers. A synopsis so abridged that it borders on the irresponsible. If you've made it this far in this book, you're probably familiar with the storyline. But, to recap, Veronica Sawyer, Winona Ryder, is a junior at Westerberg High in Sherwood, Ohio. She is the only non-Heather in an elite cadre of beautiful girls who rule the school, and are in turn ruled by the beautiful, cruel Heather Chandler, Kim Walker's. Veronica is growing restless in her position as the smartest of the mean girls, and she has pangs of guilt over leaving her old friend, Betty Finn, Renee Estevez, in the dust of her popularity. It's just like they're people I work with, says Veronica of Heather's. And our job is being popular and shit. Enter Jason, J.D. Dean, Christian Slater, recently moved to Sherwood, the son of a clearly unscrupulous, maybe even psychotic real estate developer. He makes a grand entrance, firing blanks at football-playing goons Kurt and Ram, Lance Fenton and Patrick Libatroyo, who tease him in the cafeteria. After a brief but intense flirtation with J.D., Veronica follows Heather Chandler to Remington College party, where she humiliates her by throwing up in the middle of the dorm carpet. Heather Chandler promises to ruin Veronica's reputation. No one will let you play their reindeer games. And Veronica is faced with the reality of being on Heather's bad side. Furiously journaling at home later that night, killing Heather would be like offing the Wicked Witch of the West. Veronica is interrupted by Jason crawling through her window. We cut to them in post-coital bliss as Jason suggests revenge on Heather Chandler. They break into Heather's house the next morning, figuring that the punishment should fit the crime. Veronica and JD conspire to make Heather Chandler vomit profusely. Heather makes a cute milk and orange juice mixture, a traditional cocktail with a high up-chunk factor. JD simply pours some drain cleaner into a mug, making a big show of his seriousness, distracted by a steamy kiss. Veronica mistakenly, presumably, takes the wrong mug into Heather, and JD lets her do it. He dares Heather to drink it. She does, dying instantly. Jason feigns surprise and entreats Veronica, an excellent forger, to fake Heather's suicide note. But then, after her death, Heather is painted by her peers and school administrators as the kind of sensitive, tortured soul that she most definitely was not. If anything, things are getting worse at the school. When JD tricks Veronica, or does he, into killing the football goons by giving her a gun with blanks that are actually real live bullets, she realizes that her new boyfriend is dangerous. And in an oft quoted line from the film, that my teen angst bullshit has a body count. Breaking up with him only makes matters worse. Jason devises a scheme to blow up the entire school to pieces and make it look like a mass suicide. The film ends with a satisfying comeuppance. In the most of our high school revenge plots, as in Heather's, we only end up hurting ourselves. And there's a glimmer of hope that, with the bad seeds gone, perhaps Westerberg will be a better place to be for Veronica's senior year. Through good old-fashioned networking and good new-fashioned Facebook, I was able to interview both Daniel Waters, Heather's screenwriter, and Michael Lehman, the film's director. I've been directed by the latter on a couple of TV and film projects. Both are still very eager to talk about the film that put them on the map. Waters was born in Ohio, but grew up in South Bend, Indiana, a city about 500,000 people. So why not set this epic high school story there? Ohio and Illinois have a certain sheen, Waters explains. Indiana just has a certain farmer, first red state up on the board in every election. There's something hicky about it. There's something more tabula rasa about Ohio. Indiana might as well be Kentucky. He feared that people would just say, "Oh, it's about Kentucky," and dismiss it as a story about gun-toting rednecks. He also felt he couldn't set it in relatively urban South Bend, with its multi-ethnic public schools. Heather's works because it's about trivial problems of the upper classes. If we're wondering whether a race riot is going to break out, then we're less concerned about the students and their reindeer games. These kids have pâté to eat, for God's sake. Waters will cop up to being a nerd, but the nerd that the nerds would send to the UN, i.e., the ambassador nerd who could conduct himself properly in the international conference with jocks, stoners, and preppies. This was a position that I, as not just a member of the stage group, but its leader, always aspired to. As a junior high student, the frighteningly weak and pathetic Waters ran the deadliest of school gauntlets and emerged victorious. He was the last man standing at the end of a game of dodgeball. Of all things, the experience gave him some degree of cred and probably led to his popularity as a columnist in the school paper. The column was called Troubled Waters. High school wasn't nightmarish for him either, but if you're thin-skinned, if your job is to notice things and write about them, the emotional warfare around you can turn very literal very fast. Waters had a couple of ideas for his first screenplay. A lesbian version of Badlands, Terrence Malick's stunning 1973 debut in which love-struck Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek embark on a murder spree. Like Heather's, Badlands is anchored by its lead female narration, and another in which an alienated high school girl starts dating an antichrist. He'd also written, while studying screenwriting at McGill University, a short screenplay wherein a high schooler is accused of being a witch and is subsequently burned at the stake under the supervision of 3 girls who share the same first name. Later, working in a video store, Waters decided he wanted to expand that idea into the final word in high school films, and he wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct. Waters really thought that he had a chance of getting Kubrick. The reclusive director was known to be a voracious consumer of media, watching sitcoms and even TV commercials to study their craft and find actors to work with. Waters reasons to this day that Kubrick was a man of many genres, horror, period piece, science fiction, ergo, he was due to make a high school film. The film's influences aren't entirely film school canonical. Heather's loosely follows the plot of 1976's Massacre at Central High, directed by former Russ Meyer cameraman Renee Dalder. Massacre has some striking similarities to Heather's. The last act is particularly close, beat for beat, but the earlier film is so devoid of technique, so exploitative. The near rape victims leaves the scene of her attack, conveniently forgetting to button up her shirt, or indeed, even cover herself. That the two films barely deserve the comparison. Massacre's angle is that once the upper classes are eliminated, the next class down will rise and be corrupted. A valid argument that is handed with much more humor and style in Heathers. When considering seeing Massacre at Central High be put off by the slasher movie title, failing that, be put off by the truly awful soft rock theme song. Failing that, be put off by the bad lighting, boom mic cameos, and wooden acting. And good luck finding it anyway. It's long out of print, and I had to download it illegally. Waters pleads not guilty to improving upon Massacre. I most definitely had not seen the movie, but I do remember reading about it in the beloved book Cult Movies by Danny Peary. So I guess it was rattling around somewhere in my subconscious. When it was brought up in reviews, my reaction, as well as the rest of Earth's, was, huh? This scares me because I know soon someone will do a Heathers ripoff, and when they read the comparison in a review, they'll scrunch their face in the same way. What's a Heathers? Heathers' other interesting antecedent is one of Waters' favorites in the 1968 Anthony Perkin Tuesdays Weld thriller Pretty Poison, about the relationship between a young man released from prison after serving time for arson and vulnerable teen from an unhappy home. He convinces her, almost effortlessly, that he is a CIA agent, and it looks very much like he's going to lead her down the garden path to disillusion. In a neat twist, it's Weld who poses the darker threat, laying the foundation for Heathers 2 decades later. Weld's work in Pretty Poison is pretty stellar. Her Sue Ann is a scary specter of manipulation and malevolence wrapped in a naive, all-American package. She's not a cheerleader, no, but in a sly, writerly construct, she carries a rifle in her school's drum corps. She's what the parole officers played by John Randolph is talking about when he warns Perkin that he's entering a real, very real, tough world. It's got no place for fantasies. She is even what Heathers is talking about when she advises Veronica via voiceover that real life's what sucks losers dry. Counting on Stanley Kubrick's reputation for gravitating toward epic screenplay, Waters' first draft was 196 pages long. As a rule, screenplays tend to run about a minute per page, which would have made Heathers a 3-hour-plus film. By contrast, the theatrical version runs 1 hour and 43 minutes. Frighteningly weak as I am, I sometimes require both hands to move the 196-page draft from one part of my desk to another. In this first draft, you're over an hour in before anyone dies. You get to see the strip croquet match that's only alluded to in the finished product. And preppy Peter Dawson creates a massive subplot out of an anti-suicide organization called the Genesis Club. There's also the legendary prom in heaven scene. Veronica kills JD, but then, seeing all the abuse still going on in the hallways, she lets the bombs blow the school and herself, quite literally, to kingdom come. Smash cut to the last dance, where all the students, regardless of social caste or standing, are partying together, with Veronica gazing upon them beatifically under a banner that reads, "What a waste. Oh, the humanity." Footnote. If that sounds familiar, it's not just because the ending was ever shot. It's because that's more or less how Titanic winds up. Cumbersome and ambitious, this 196-page draft made it to screenwriter Larry Karaszewski. Footnote. Karaszewski, a great screenwriter himself, Ed Wood among others, has apparently never lived down giving Waters the note, "Do they all have to be named Heather?" Who had known Waters in South Bend and who showed it to his USC classmate, the young director Michael Lehman. Lehman had grown up in San Francisco, a hippie with deep love of film, nurtured at the nearby Pacific Film Archive. In high school, he got what he calls a really good taste of girl-to-girl cruelty. In the summer before ninth grade, his oldest sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease and had to take the first year of high school off for treatment. Her friends turned on her, spreading rumors that she was absent due to a pregnancy. "People that I knew," he marveled, "friends of mine who I liked, would say nasty things about my sister just because it was fun to be mean. And that was disturbing." Add to that, 2 friends who killed themselves in high school, both out of the blue, both obviously unforgettable. Being a fundamentally superficial person, I didn't take it at all deeply. But I felt that. And this is something Heathers goes into in depth. Grown-ups didn't get it. Lehman's student film, Beaver Gets a Boner, was about a hard-working kid who needs a college scholarship so he can pay off his drug supplier. The charmingly crass film's highlight is a scene in which our hero sells heroin to a Boy Scout. On the strength of that, Lehman had secured a development deal with the struggling New World Pictures. The independent studio released arguably the finest films associated with Roger Corman: Big Bad Mama, Death Race 2000, and Rock and Roll High School, to name just about the best triple feature an exploitation fan could pray for. But by 1983, Corman had sold the company, and the output had softened to movies like the Sarah Jessica Parker teen vehicle, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. A film that had one decent joke, and you've just heard it. But New World also released the seminal Hellraiser films, which, to a certain type of cultist at least, started out as smart, scary, and magnetic. Lehman had cut his production teeth assisting Francis Ford Coppola's on The Outsiders and Rumblefish. The latter, an underrated impressionist gem of adolescence. He fell quickly in love with Waters' Heather script and passed it on to Denise Di Donovi, who had been a New World's executive vice president of production and was now looking to make a big, controversial splash in her debut as a producer. He then called Waters with some notes and suggested cuts. Waters would have none of it. Who is this USC kid, he asked himself. When am I know in my heart, going to get Kubrick to direct my work? Lehman patiently asked Waters if he were unable to secure the director of Barry Lyndon and Dr. Strangelove for his screenplay, would he please consider attaching Lehman? Waters was 25, Lehman 30. Principal photography began in the spring of 1988, starring 16-year-old Winona Ryder, who had been pushed on New World. They feared she wasn't glamorous enough, having seen her in what everyone had only seen her in, the geeky girl in Lucas, and the proto-goth in Beetlejuice. Lehman, though, saw in her a Natalie Wood quality. For JD, the producers passed on the too nice Brad Pitt in favor of Christian Slater. For Heather Duke, they cast against type a sweet-faced actress best known for her reoccurring role on Little House on the Prairie, Shannon Doherty. And with that, the film's damn near perfect ensemble snapped into place like a bullet entering the chamber. Not long before the film commenced shooting, Steve White from New World asked that the ending, the prom in heaven, be changed. His point, Lehman recalls, was that as a responsible film executive, he couldn't really make a movie that was a satire dealing with teenage suicide in which the character that we do identify with kills herself. And kills other people. White feared that being blamed for copycat suicides, which Lean dismissed, if a kid commits suicide after seeing a movie, then they were going to commit suicide anyway. Their problems go much deeper than the hour and a half that they spent in a theater. Our feeling was you can't draw out that direct causal connection, and you shouldn't have your work determined by that fear. But we weren't responsible film executives. White, no tight-ass executive cliche, he'd studied with the famed LA sketch comedy group The Groundlings and had overseen the first TV movie about AIDS, promised to keep other requests for changes to a minimum, but the massive murder-suicide at the end had to go. The only other studio expressed interest in the film was New Line, which was making a mint on the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but they wanted to spend less money and asked for more changes. Yes, the company that brought you Freddy Krueger wanted to tone down Heathers. There were other little tweaks on the way. The character Veronica is much more complicit in the murders in the earlier drafts. She consciously poisons Heather Chandler. She electrocutes Peter Dawson in the Genesis Club story arc. Water describes her as a Travis Bickle in a Molly Ringwald package. But by the final draft, she has turned into, if not an innocent lead astray, at the very least a manslaughter practitioner with basically a good intentions. Regarding the Veronica of the finished film, Waters laughingly calls her the Albert Speer of Westerberg High, noting that, like Hitler's architect, she never had actually anything to do with the killing, but was part of the aesthetic, the look, the camaraderie of tyranny, and loved benefiting from the power. Waters himself softened Veronica when Ryder was cast due to the wobbly, a word he was fond of, quality that she brought to the heroine. That wobbliness led us to root for her despite the fact that she does willingly shoot Kurt. More on that later. Footnote. Ryder has that effect on Waters. In his last directorial effort, Sex and Death 101, she plays a woman named Death Knell, who serially puts her male victims into comas, a serial coma inducer, and her character is made much more palatable by her warm, vulnerable, and yes, wobbly performance. Lehman speaks wistfully of Waters' crestfallen reaction to some of the changes, but likes his adjustment, calling him the most inventive, flexible writer I've ever worked with. When the Southland Corporation balked at the use of their 7-Eleven chain, Waters swiftly created the Snappy Snack Shack and changed the Slurpee to a slushie. Lehman has never viewed the film's ending as a sincere note of hope. His tongue was really up his cheek, he says. He doesn't think it was a really happy ending. It's just an ending that avoids total destruction. I respectfully disagree. More on that later, too. I've come around to the ending, Waters said recently, especially now that I talk to a lot of teenage girls and women growing up at the time of the Heathers release. The fact that Veronica doesn't die, the fact that it doesn't end in violence, was a good thing for them. One alternate ending, never scripted but pitched after the shooting had commenced, starts just the way the current one does. But after JD's death, when Veronica asks the eternal victim, obese Martha Dunstock, to hang out and rent some new releases, Martha pulls out a gun and says, "Fuck you, Heather," and shoots Veronica in either the stomach or the mouth, depending on when Waters is telling the story. Veronica, spitting up blood, bubbles out again and again, "My name is not Heather. My name is not Heather." While Martha, in one final salute to Kubrick, stands up from her wheelchair, triumphantly announcing, "I can walk, a la Dr. Strangelove." Are you a Heather? Naming and signifiers in Heathers. Heathers is a weird beast. A fluffy, black comedy, a brightly lit confection that gestures towards depth and occasionally delivers an eerily timeless morality play. It begs to be taken seriously, and then it seems to mock us for doing so. This script is a tour of the high and lows of American culture. Embedded within are references to the perennial Archie comics, with its Cain and Abel duo, Veronica and Betty, Mark Twain's most carefree hero, Tom Sawyer, 80s college rock icons, The Replacements, and the lead singer, Paul Westerberg. Footnote: the spelling change was not originally intended. Waters was asked by producers to change the E to U since Westerberg sounds a little too Jewish for a suburban Ohio school. And Sherwood Anderson's Joyous story cycle, Winesburg, Ohio. All are deliberate. All mean something. Our heroine is named Veronica Sawyer, not Betty Finn. She's not the chaste good girl from the Archie comics. Betty Cooper, and she's not Huck Finn. The guy who liberates the slaves, however temporarily. She's the black-haired temptress, Veronica Lodge, merged with the insouciant prankster Tom Sawyer. The insouciant prankster who lacks a real moral compass, and not the noble fighting against the odds Finn, whose book is a staple in 12th grade reading lists, because simply put, Finn is better for you than Sawyer. Veronica's trapped in a high school named for the Midwest's greatest indie rock poet, Paul Westerberg, whose first 4 or 5 albums with the Replacements are required 80s alienation music. On the 1982 Stink EP, Westerberg gave us the verse-chorus progression. They laugh in the middle of my speech, swinging in the hall out of reach, learning who they can take, talk, fuck school, fuck my school. At least, those are the lyrics that can be made out in between primal screams. These words are not supposed to be an articulate indictment of our education system, just a raw spleen venting about how school can make you feel. The movie setting of Sherwood, Ohio, cast a respectful nod towards Anderson's dense story collection, which has written after the author suffered a nervous breakdown while running a paint company in Elmira, well outside of Cleveland. Fleeing to Chicago from a small town, he wrote a dizzyingly collection of short stories set in fictional Winesburg, peeling back onion layers of small-town judgment and hypocrisy. In one tale, Anderson paints a stunningly bleak portrait of telegraph operator Wash Williams. The ugliest man in town is hardly innocent victim. The underneath his fat, unsightly girth beats a misanthropic heart burned black by philandering wife and her pimpish mother. The story ends with the mother castrating the daughter and stripping her naked in front of her cuckolded husband. The husband, mad with grief, strikes the mother with a chair. The story is called Respectability. Calling the town Winesburg might have been too glaring a reference, too on the nose. Sherwood will do just fine. Plus, there's an added bonus of the Sherwood Forest reference, since Jason is, no question, killing the rich. However, since there are no real poor people in the films, Sherwood, who might benefit from any spoils of JD's crime, his motives are questionable at best. Names obviously carry a ton of significance in the script, and I remember this being the first film where I really paid attention to the, dare I say, text of a movie. And also, remember that the Betty and Veronica thing was pointed out to me by someone else. Maybe even Heather number 2. So this was my first time dealing with film analysis, maybe even semiotics. For it's not just the borrowed names that are important, but how they are reappropriated within the film itself. Forging signatures is a theme that comes up throughout the film. A forged signature helps introduce Heather Chandler's cruelty to another one's covers up her murder. But that word, forge, means a few other things besides to fake. It also means to build, to create, to construct. And we start to forge our identities in high school, which is what makes these forgeries so sinister. Heather Chandler fakes a MASH note from Kurt Kelly to Martha Dumbtruck. Heather Duke, stepping gracefully into Chandler's vacancy, plays the same MASH note prank in the film. And then JD sends Veronica a note that mimics his own penmanship, as if to say, I can pretend to be you. These children have barely come up to understand who they are before people start absconding with their names, their voices, and their identities. What a film professor of mine called the name game doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. The name Heather, in Middle English origin, is the name of a Scottish flower. According to the US Census, it was virtually unheard of as a name until 1935, and then had steadily climbed of commonality, peaking in the early 1970s as the third most popular girl's name. In the United States, if you were born in the early 1970s, that means that, like me, like these characters, you were in high school in the late 1980s. The name popularity has dropped considerably since then. It seems like every third girl was named Heather when I was growing up. Yet, I don't know anyone who's naming their kid Heather now. We likely have Lehman and Waters to thank for this sharp decline. In their pop sociology book, Freakonomics, authors Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner point out a tantalizing, their word, trend among girls' names. According to the birth certificate data of every California child born since 1961, they say certain names are more conspicuously white, more conspicuously high income, and more conspicuously reflective of their parents. Their namers, higher education. But that data is very fluid. Levitt and Dubner make the following assertion. There was a clear pattern at play. Once a name catches among high-income, highly educated parents, it starts working its way down the socioeconomic ladder. Amber and Heather started out as high-end names, as did Stephanie and Brittany. For every high-end baby names named Stephanie and Brittany, another 5 lower-income girls received those names within 10 years. They even have a chart to back it up, and it shows how Heather went from being a respectable 9th most popular white girl name in 1980 to a number 2 ranking in the low end of the white girl names in 1990. Heather's captures a moment in time when to be a Heather of a high school age was to be rich, white, and full of hope. 20 years later, being named Heather in the years between 9th and 12th grade could mean something else entirely. In the United States anyway, overseas the film was released with the horribly non-specific movie title Lethal Attraction. Footnote: Waters and Lehman liked to joke that the film should be called Fatal Weapon, which sounds like one of those horribly non-specific movies that Vincent from Entourage would always stars in. In Europe, the name's Heather doesn't necessarily connotate privilege and wealth. It's just a Scottish plant. The Heathers' last name are key to understanding them, as well as the regal sounding Chandler, which also echoes shadowy tales of Philip Marlowe author Raymond Chandler, and the royal, but still not quite in charge, Duke. And when there's the cheerleader Heather McNamara, who is named for John F. Kennedy's defense secretary and chief Vietnam strategist Robert McNamara, I wanted the guy who was not at the top guy, but who was one of the architects, explains Waters, who had read David Halberdstam's epic Vietnam account. the best and the brightest, just before writing the Heathers screenplay. Although Bob McNamara definitely had a lot more going upstairs. A cheerleader named for the man who negotiated the waters of Congress to escalate the war, who allegedly knew about the harmful effects of Agent Orange, and who didn't recant his position until years later, years after the making of Heathers even. And our lone wolf anti-hero, Jason Dean, sometimes called JD, calls to mind the iconic rebels of the iconic reclusive authors, all without explicitly hitting the nail on the head. In an early draft of the script, Jason carries a rebel without a cause lunchbox, hitting the nail so squarely on the head as to split the wood and render the whole 2x4 useless. But the idea isn't to flatter the character by giving him a name so close to the star of Giant. I have a thing against these Jareds, Jason, and Joshes, Water says, which leads me to quickly protest that I'm a John. Water clarifies. John and Jack, those are names, and James is a real name too. Probably if I was writing the script today, I'd called him Joshua Dean, but Jason seemed like... I'm kind of making fun of JD character in that he's like 80 mimeographs of James Dean. And this is what you've got. You got a wobbly, not quite right off version of, oh, we're going by Jason Dean now. Real life sucks, losers try. Bullies and their victims in Heathers and elsewhere. As I've said, high school was not that brutal of a time for me. But the city itself, New York, under Mayor Koch, under Mayor Beam before him, could be rougher than any high school. Bullies exist everywhere in the city. The city can be a bully itself. My mom and I twice came home to find our small 2-bedroom apartment broken into. I was mugged for the first time at age 8. When you're mugged at 8, all your assailants get in is $1 and a library card. But it happened again, punched by strangers, marked correctly as a passive, non-threatening, and then assaulted, wallet stolen, shoved up against the wall, and hit just because I could be. I've never told anyone this story in its entirety, let alone written it down. I'm in 9th grade, and one weekend I'm coming up from the subway with my friend, Ben, and out of town, nowhere, 5 African-American kids come hurtling down the skinny hallway, reaching into my pockets. Ben's off like a shot, scurrying to the token booth, while I swat these children's hands out of my pocket. None of them are taller than I am, except for one. In my mind, he was 6'13" or something, but in reality, he was probably only about 5'10". Understanding that I'm putting up a fight and that no money will be gotten today, the tallest one punches me. A sailing blow to the cheek that knocks my glasses off and almost instantly swells to the size of my face. I stagger back to the token booth, where the insulated clerk calls the cops and has us fill out an incident report. Into which I, channeling misdirected rage, drop a racial slur. Yeah. Your author just told you that he wrote the N-word on a public document when he was 14, and I'm afraid the story gets worse. The cops arrive, 2 Sipowitches, one actually fat, bald, and mustachioed, and drives us to the precinct in a squad car. We fill out more forms, and then he takes us to the public housing right near where we were mugged. It was dark in the middle of a subway corridor. It all happened very fast. I don't recognize anyone. So slam, back into the squad car, just to drive around the neighborhood and see if we see anyone. We do. They have nothing to do with us at all, but 2 black kids break into a sprint when they see a cop car and go dashing into a nearby parking lot. The squad car bangs a knife-sharp left into the lot, and the cops are out, guns fucking drawn. One kid has vanished. Hopped a fence or something, but one kid is under the car and very, very hesitant to come out. He does, and the cops put him in the back seat. Handcuffed between Ben and me, the cops begin to dole out questions. Where you running to, brother? Why you take off when you saw us? And when the kid won't answer, they start off putting on a show for our benefit, as if to say, hey, We didn't catch your black guys, but at least we can fuck with this one. What if I shot ya? What if I'd shot you in the leg, huh? Can't no play beanball no more. What if you got one of those trigger-happy lady cops who shoots you in the dick? Then you can't play basketball. Oh, fuck. What's good your life? It goes on like this until, absent any charges, they let the kid go. Keeping my head down, I step out of the car so he can get out and be uncuffed, set free. We drive back to the precinct where my mom, who's been called a while ago, sits on a bench on the verge of tears. Bullies all of them, the 5 kids who tried to mug the 2 kid who punched me and the punk middle-class bitch who wrote down nigger in a police report. The cops who drew guns on a kid for the felony of simultaneously running and being black. Bullies are not limited to any particular gender or race or economic status. So I both laugh and shudder when I watch the bully scene after Heather Chandler's funeral. The funeral itself is ridiculous. Heather looks stunningly gorgeous in death. The priest lectures the attendees on the dangers of MTV video games. And Ram silently asks God, "Why do you have to kill such hot snatch?" On the church lawn immediately following the service, Kurt and Ram are planning a double date. A geek, identified in the script as Braces, obviously steps on Kurt's foot. The scene continues. The script differs slightly from what made it to screen. Kurt, that pudwapper just stepped on my foot. Ram, let's kick his ass. Kurt, cool off. We're seniors. Ram, goddamn geek. Braces gives them the finger. Braces, awkwardly defiant. Sit and spin. Kurt and Ram turn to each other, more amused than angered. Kurt, that little prick. The bolting jocks effortlessly catch Braces and put him into a hunched-over position. The other geeks look on, ashamed. Kurt, all right, little piece of shit fag. Do you like to suck big dicks? Braces, cut it out. Ram pushes Braces down harder. Kurt, say it, man. Say you like to suck big dicks. Rodney, leave him alone, Kurt. Ram, off-screen, say it. Braces, okay. You like to suck big dicks. Unamused, Ram throws Braces to the ground. Braces, semi-cries. Braces, I like to suck big dicks. I can't get enough of them. Satisfied? As well as this scene reads on paper, it cooks on screen. First off, kudos to the actor playing Braces, Curtis Marlowe, who takes the vague stage direction, awkwardly defiant, and makes it seem like the simplest of instructions. You read awkwardly defiant on the page and think, what does that even mean? Then you see Marlowe perform it and you think, well, it looks like that's awkwardly defiant. His delivery of sit and spin at a time when a mumbled sorry would have spared him a lot of pain is quixotic in its courage. Okay, he replies, while in one of those unforgivable wrestling holds, and then provides the movie with a terrific misdirection. You like to suck big dicks, even though he gets slammed into the ground and has to eat shit within seconds. It's a glorious moment of wish fulfillment, and it's even more satisfying with repeat viewings. When we know that Braces is going to live to the end credits, Kurt and Ram less so, we spend a lot of the film looking up at the characters. They're looming over us, whether they're forging suicide notes or trapping Braces in a wrestling hold. The camera's right below Braces' face when staring up at an imposing tableau. Braces, Kurt and Ram and Rodney, another geek, and the huge stone closing out the immediate center. This is the vision of Heather's. Everyone, nerds, bullies, church, they're all piling up on us. We cannot breathe without someone smushing our faces into the lawn of a church. And to the fact that it is in this scene, that the scene alone, that we can make out some telltale palm trees in the corner frame. It would have been great if it had actually been filmed in Ohio, but the bullies in the budget office kept the filmmakers in Sherman Oaks, California, near the mall where they shot Valley Girl. Kurt and Ram's death are pretty expertly set up. We know that Jason fires blanks, that's been established, and we know that Kurt and Ram have done the unthinkable, running around the school claiming that they had a little sword fight in Veronica's mouth. JD pulls together a collection of gay paraphernalia, or what is taken for gay in Sherwood, Ohio. Mineral water is the smoking gun of their sexuality, and then tells Veronica about his Ich Lüge bullets. German speakers have the joke spoiled for them. Ich lüge means I lie. And a creepy turn after Jason has shot Ram and Veronica has shot Kurt. Veronica lets on that she knew more than she admitted earlier. Ich lüge bullets. I'm an idiot, she proclaims, not asking what Ich lüge means. Just saying, I'm an idiot. Could she have known? Could her denial about JD's and her own intentions be so deep that she could shoot Kurt in the chest and honestly think he'd live? This scene in the car after the murders features the satanic moment when Veronica, in a fit of teen self-harm, burns the palm of her hand with a car lighter, and JD, the devil, lights his cigarette off the heroin stigmata. Her burning palm. If it's an imperfect stigmata, keep in mind that Veronica is an imperfect heroine. Back to the church lawn. It's a striking microcosm scene, and it seems even sharper once you hear the filmmakers were aping. As mentioned, if you talk to Michael Lehman and Daniel Waters about Heathers, you'll hear the name Stanley Kubrick a lot. Waters is dream director and one of Lehman's inspiration. Kubrick hovers distantly above the film like a muse. You have to have had it pointed out to you, but once you do, you think, of course. Look at the claustrophobia cafeteria scenes. The bright white light invokes the barracks in Full Metal Jacket, released just a year before Heathers began shooting. That haze through Westerberg's long halls echoes the ethereal dust of Barry Lyndon. The frequent use of low, wide angles throughout the movie, and the movie also bears Kubrick's fingerprints. Look at Brace's comeuppance above, or Jason and Veronica's forging suicide note, or the wickedly sharp faculty conference, all shot from below, as if the viewer laid out a slab on a huge table. They now reek of war room strangelove. And all of that's great. I love Kubrick too, but I came of an age in 1980s, and I want to talk about John Hughes. Hughes had just died when I started interview for this book, and he came up pretty organically in the discussions. If the decade began in all its 80ness with 16 Candles in 1984, it's most surely ended with Heathers, just as morning in America turned to long afternoons watching Iran-Contra hearings. 16 Candles heroine, Samantha's chaste longings can morph into Jason homicide, and worse yet, Veronica's complacent complicity. Is Heathers an angry rebuke to 16 Candles' idealism? Breakfast Club's mawkishness? Ferris Bueller's consequence-free wish fulfillment? Lehman is gentle with Hughes. When John Hughes started to make his film, I always thought they were clever and funny and entertaining. And I had no problem with that. I think he's a genius and great, but I also found them irritating because they presented what I thought was a whitewashed fantasy view of teenage life. The kind of anxiety and kind of issues that were his characters dealt with were, they were real. I think everyone related to them, but they were still sanitized somehow. Nobody took drugs. Nobody really took drugs with John Hughes movies. Footnote. We can assume Lehman's qualification is because of the pot scene in Breakfast Club, in which 5 strangers smoke weed together and no one falls into a pit of paranoid despair, except for Claire, Molly Ringwald, who snaps out of it pretty quickly. They had a very colorful but very PG-13 language, and that was so different from what my experience of being a teenager was. I didn't buy it. I wanted to show the other side of the John Hughes world. Not that I didn't like that world, but I wanted to show a darker version of it. Waters' past interviews presented him as a man trying to correct the perceived damage that John Hughes had inflicted on the world. The Waters of the 21st century had softened on Hughes, and he gives it up for the man who took teenagers as seriously as they did themselves. But he dismissed the Breakfast Club's assertion that when you grow up, your heart dies, with a canned but heartfelt, your heart dies when you're 10. So, if your heart dies that early, the adults in Heathers are even worse than the ones in Hughes' movies where occasionally Paul Dooley steps in to make everything alright, and Harry Dean Stanton can be super dad, not 2 years after appearing as a coke-addled Obi-Wan in Repo Man. The adults in Heathers have completely checked out. They're either robotic, bureaucratic principals or touchy-feely hippies who miss the point in an entirely different way. The smoke-filled faculty meetings illustrate this hilariously, and they are as good as any similar board meeting in network. Lehman commented on the suicides of his high school friends, says, "The experience of adolescence is that adults don't understand. They somehow, they must have gone through it themselves, but where is that pill that they swallowed that makes them forget everything as soon as it's over?" Hughes' parents, with the exception of the cardboard no-shows in the Breakfast Club, seems to remember that their kids are going through a hard time. The sad thing is that no one seems to have thought to ask the ever-reclusive Hughes what he thought about Heathers. Did he laugh? Did he cringe? Did he stare at it vacantly? Did he smack his forehead and think, "What have I wrought?" Was he offended? And if so, did he realize that he had some fucking nerve being offended by anything after bringing up the world's 16 candles long duck dong? But this writer likes to think that there's room for all these visions of high school. This can sound like meek equivocation, but there's truth in 16 Candles. There's truth in Ferris Bueller, and occasionally even in Breakfast Club. Although my favorite scene, tellingly, has always been the moment between the adults, Janitor and Dick, the vice principal, which ends with the janitor blackmailing Dick. There's real desperation between the two men, for unlike the teenagers upstairs, these guys do not have their whole lives ahead of them. But go back for a second to the moment above. Braces is below the jocks, and we're below braces. So we have no choice but to sympathize with the downtrodden. Viscerally, passionately. Now, check out the Ferris Bueller DVD commentary, where Hughes justifies the inclusion of Cameron, the killjoy, in his Chicago Good Time Odyssey. "I've always had my girlfriend, and for some guys in the back seat saying, 'What are we doing?' Watch your back. Geeks of America, Hughes very well might not have been the peer you think he was." Color me impressed. Heathers' aesthetic. No one person can or will take credit for Heathers working as well as it does. An email exchange with Lehman and Waters regarding a couple of set dressing details results in both of them crediting the art department, Kara Lindstrom and John Hutman, for the rich, specific details. Although Waters does take responsibility for one prop, he insisted that the book on Heather's table not be Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, but Cliff Notes for The Bell Jar. The screen is packed with fun treasures that reward repeated viewings, sometimes just jokes, sometimes totems of illuminate the character. The film begins with the nightmarish image of the title, the characters playing croquet, knocking the enormous wooden balls into Veronica's head. She's buried up to her neck in her own backyard and begins the film narration from there. Interesting choice, croquet. Not a lot of Americans know how to play it, too European, and it's unquestionably a rich person's game. Think of how many times golf has been used as an expositional device to connote reckless privilege or upper-class malfeasance. Think of how many times a director has placed his villains on a golf course, so we really know that this guy is not just evil, he's fucking loaded and evil. Off the top of my head, without a double checking on the internet, the Contestant Gardener, Goldfinger, Hostel Part 2, Avatar. Now, having conducted an informal poll of Twitter's followers and Facebook's friends, Casino, Falling Down, The Informant, Fahrenheit 9/11, Rich Bad Guy on the Links counts as a time-honored cinematic trope. Now, what's a more nefarious, elitist sport than golf? How about a sport that requires an enormous backyard to have a proper match? How about a sport where you can legally knock another players off the green? How about a sport that has been called the Queen of Games? The croquet court is set up in the backyard of our heroine, but it's Heather's Chandler who really excels at the game. And when Veronica, seeking redemption, invites Betty Finn over to play, Finn starts winning, but Veronica quickly overtakes her. At the crucial point when she could knock Betty's ball off the green, Veronica relents and foreshadows the film's ending. She, in effect, pardons Betty. If you're in dire need of a literary antecedent, the Red Queen also hosts an eerie, cruel version of the game in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We'd be fools not to notice the croquet regal and malevolent implications. Speaking of green and red, no discussion of Heather's is complete until we talk about the film's use of color. Is it just vulgarly symbolic? Are we supposed to look at Heather's Duke's green ensemble and snot, aha! I get it! I was an English major. She's envious! According to Daniel Waters, no. So I have 3 characters named Heather, and I put their last names on everything, but it was kind of like, it just became a major concern of mine just to make sure you knew the difference between them all the times. And so anything I could do to highlight the difference, maybe it has a utilitarian purpose in the script, but when you see the film, it's like, they really took the ball and ran with it. But any critic's worth his useless bachelor's degree knows that the filmmaker's intentions are not that important. And Lehman's father, to honest to God, German-born Freudian psychoanalyst, would likely agree with me. Cinematographer Francis Kenny says the Heathers DVD features Swatch, dogs, and Diet Coke heads. That his original intentions was to start the film in a very safe, pastel tone to try to get the audience to feel that they were going to watch a very bright comedy and then suck them in, not just with the words, but with the depth of color, and the story turned darker. I would therefore start to go into a darker tone. Thankfully, this doesn't happen. The shoulder pads, footnote. And in all fairness, Daniel Waters freely admits that the shoulder pads were already kind of dated at the time. Take care of placing our film in the Reagan era without the addition of pastels, thank you. The consistent color saturation tells a more interesting story, I think. At the fade-in, the Heathers and Veronica are introduced immediately with clothes that match your croquet balls and their personalities. The colors don't just pop, they pour off screen. The blacks and blues of Veronica's outfit pierce us, remind us her sadness, and how masculine she appears next to her peers. The monocle, the relatively smallness of her hair, and the walking bruise she is. Heather McNamara, the cowardly Secretary of Defense, is cloaked in yellow, and when forced to pick a pseudonym on the radio show Hot Probs, she chooses the flaxen cartoon hero of Tweety. She even tries to overdose on yellow pills. Heather Chandler's red, shoulder-padded jacket screams power the way James Dean's windbreaker does in Rebel Without a Cause. Her lipstick is bright red. The inside of her locket is crimson. It has to be mentioned that Westerberg High School's colors are red and white, placing Kurt and Ram and their omnipresent Letterman jackets in the same rich, privileged camp as Chandler. Dennis, the yearbook editor, Phil Lewis, who spreads the Heather Chandler had a warmth and her death is a great loss meme through the school and shares her taste in courtship. He wears a bright red sweater in his big scene, and there's an oft discussed red scrunchie over which the film's title is projected during the opening credits, and which is handed down like the Excalibur of popularity. JD takes it from the dead Heather Chandler and bestows it to Heather Duke, knowing full well she'll use it for evil, until it lands, justly, in the hands and soot-blackened hair of Veronica. And screw it, Heather Duke spends the movie jealous of Chandler's power, holding the talismanic scrunchie until Veronica takes it from her in the last scene. And she's dressed in green, the color of bile, the color of envy. She also switches over to red after conquering her bulimia, a disorder marked by a lot of green. Once Heather Chandler, her oppressor, is taken out of the picture. The red goes deep. Veronica tells us that Duke even performs Chandler's trademark cruel fake mash note prank on another nerd student, and she raids her red locker, taking a bunch of key rings that presumably hold the keys to the kingdom. Footnote: we never see her use the keys, nor do we see her take any of the books in Chandler's locker, one of which is The Castrated Family, a 1977 book about the author Harold T. Voth refers to as a pathological parenting, that is, parental behavior that results from maladjusted children. Voth warned of seismic cultural shifts and how they threatened the nuclear family. He was also on the governing board of NARTH, National Association for the Research of Therapy of Homosexuality, which works tirelessly to cure homosexuality. Are we to take this as a sign of Chandler's right-leaning politics? The only time she returns to her previous green is when she dons a fatigue jacket, law-enforced stoner gear in the 1980s, to get the burnouts to sign her petition, which of course turns out to be JD's masterpiece, a massive suicide note covered with genuine signatures of the kids who don't realize what they're signing. The fashion blog Enjoy Your Style writes in sharp detail on the subject of color in the film, pointing out that Betty Finn and Martha Dumptruck are both introduced wearing pink, an inescapably weak color that puts them at the bottom of the school's social order. Enjoy Your Style makes a great observation about an accessory. Heather McNamara gives Veronica Heather Chandler's old swatch, a band of which is blue and red. This is Veronica, torn between her two allegiances, to herself and to the social hierarchy she helped support. Indeed, that she helped build to continue the Albert Speer comparison. And every time she sees how much time she has left, she will see that conflict. Color me impressed, says JD toward the end of the film and his life. Color us impressed, JD. You've just deliberately referenced a Paul Westerberg penned replacement song off 1983's Hootenanny, while simultaneously drawing our attention to the film's chief aesthetic appeal. Heather's color hum and vibrate and make hues oeuvre look like done public domain films in the 1930s. They echo the brilliant hues of Douglas Sirk's melodramas with their heightened visual and emotions. In fact, Lehman speaks very profoundly of being exposed to Cirque in his youth. As arc as Heather's can be, it's a very intense piece of work, filled with nervous laughter and horror, in colors that signify melodrama, imagined and real. That is high school. High school is very funny, very cruel, very sad, very scary, very. Lehman's youthful and magnificent obsession with Cirque makes Heather's the weird niece that lives in the attic in the house owned by All That Heaven Allows. I'll elaborate. The 1955 melodrama, set in a conservative Connecticut town, features a widowed Jane Wyman falling in love with her gardener, an insanely charismatic Rock Hudson. To see Hudson open a wine bottle with his teeth is to understand, finally, why our moms all died a little when his secret came out in the 80s. Hudson's character is quite a few years younger than Wyman's and hardly her social stratum, so the whole town seems to turn on her. The gossips, the country club, her hypocritical children. Wyman, the actress newly divorced from Ronald Reagan, and wears her emotions on her sleeve, breaks your heart with every forlorn glance at her encroaching surroundings. When the film ends happily, it's earned. You've been through hell with the poor woman. And the joyful tears have not come cheap. Now, if all this camp and treacle sounds like a total antithesis of Heather's, remember, we're dealing with the bitterness of a small town judgment and the viral quality of gossip. And it's all being presented in meticulous mise-en-scène and eye-popping colors. In interviews, Cirque often refers to his excessive presentation of the material. And here's another Cirque quote that ties the two films together. This is the dialectic. There is very short distance between high art and trash that contains an element of craziness is by this very quality nearer to art. Lehman is just as guilty of excessive presentation. When asked if he regrets anything from his first feature, he points out the self-conscious film student affections that pop up throughout. The low-angle shots, the wide lenses, that recounts his insecurities. Maybe I should go low? Will it take people out of the movie? But in almost the same breath, Lehman changes his tune. Maybe it takes a young director, he notes, to bring that element of craziness. Lehman has done a great work in TV, hemming down shows like HBO's brilliant The Comeback and several episodes of the fun and pulpy True Blood. But his film work has diminished in excess, and he's paid a huge price for it in terms of critical response, and maybe that craziness is what brings us closer to art, or at least to the art that Cirque disciples Rainer Werner Fassbinder, Todd Haynes, and John Woo. Footnote. No, fuck you. The killer is just magnificent obsession with kick-ass gunfights. Create. If we dismiss All That Heaven Allows as the over-top proto-chick flick, we're missing out on the really gorgeous piece of anti-50s complacency propaganda, which was made smack dab in the middle of the 1950s. Similarly, if we shrug off Heather's as cheap, cynical spoof of the 16 Candles instead of appreciating its moody beauty, we rob ourselves fully of enjoying one of the great, indeed few, satires of the 80s. A Stop at the Snappy Snack Shack. Michael Lehman on the look of Heather's. I like the aesthetic of a low camera angle on a wide angle lens. I think it's beautiful. First of all, I don't look at the world through a 50mm lens, which is your standard lens. I never do, forget it. I see all of that gesturing broadly across the room, and it's wide. and the distortion you get from a wide-angle lens doesn't feel like distortion. I used to draw cartoons as a kid, and I used to draw people with huge noses, and I feel like that's how people look. They sort of come at you that way. Directors of photography hate them. It's hard for them to light because they've got a big ceiling in the background. Everything becomes difficult. And wide lenses in general are hard to light because there are fewer places to put the lights. And longer lenses are more flattering. They flatten facial features, they round the background out of focus, and they're selective in what they see. The filmmakers I like to watch when I was younger were Stanley Kubrick and Roman Polanski, and both of them, favored low, wide angles a lot. So to me, that was good filmmaking. That was what the good filmmakers did. And also, at that time, the late 1980s, it was very fashionable to use long lenses. There was a style, sort of a Tony Scott style of movies that were more action-driven or beauty-driven, where close-ups would be shot on a 200-millimeter lens, and people would look gorgeous, and they'd be backlit, and the background would be way out of focus, and it was a real late 80s, 90s style of filmmaking that was the dynamic in a very different way. I didn't like that. I was opposed to that. And I was also opposed to, like John Hughes movies, because they were fun, but he always shot very standard style. What you'd call more neutral style. I didn't want to do that. You don't deserve my fucking speech. The dialogue of Heathers. My freshman year dorm room was adorned with a few things. A Monty Python poster, Graham Chapman and Eric Idle crucified at the end of Life of Brian, a black and white Woody Allen picture, a few random flyers from rock shows I had seen that year, and my prized possession, the Heathers poster I had bought at Jerry Ohlinger's movie memorabilia shop on 14th Street. Footnote. I paid $20 for it. Ohlinger's has since moved uptown, and a Heathers poster, fold in one sheet, will now run you $150. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't use it as an easy litmus test. The people I continued to hang out with throughout freshman year had seen the film and loved it. It was greeted that school year 1989 to 90 with either indifference or serene nod and what amounts to great film critics when you're 18. Man, that movie has the best lines. One of the things that keeps Heathers from being just a sad little time capsule of the 80s is its inventive use of slang. As mentioned, I lived through high school in the 80s and can attest that at no point were things vary. No one ever said, "fuck me," gently with a chainsaw, and no one was ever accused of having eaten a brain tumor for breakfast. Waters eschews the actual awesome, fresh slang of the 80s to create a whole new, damn near Burgessian parlance for his high schoolers. Maybe even a nod to the NADSAT language of A Clockwork Orange. An early draft of Heather's script contained the following exchange between Heather Chandler and her mother. Enter Heather Chandler's bedroom. Day. Heather Chandler's bedroom is lushy and expensively furnished with a glass coffee table as an eye-catching centerpiece. Heather Chandler half sleeps in twisted bedsheets as Mrs. Chandler sticks her head in the door. Mrs. Chandler: "We are leaving soon for your grandmother's. If you care to join us." Heather Chandler: "Bag that." Mrs. Chandler: "Is that a no in your lingo?" As the door closes, Heather Chandler raises her arm and gives her departed mother the finger. Heather Chandler: "Lingo this." This scene does not appear in the finished film, where the slang is mostly ersatz, and it's never addressed. This is just the way people talk in the alternate universe that is Sherwood, Ohio. It's another smack in the face of the Hughes films, which are pretty meticulously rendering how people talk to each other at the time. and are as linguistically relevant now as the medieval morality plays. It's important to note that one time authentic 80s jargon is used, it's by the priest at Heather Chandler's funeral. Glenn Shaddix plays the kindly father called Father Ripper in the film. Father Faust, in an earlier draft from his eulogy, "We must pray the other teenagers of Sherwood, Ohio know the name, that righteous dude who can solve their problems. It's Jesus Christ, and he's in the book." Righteous and dude were part of teenspeak at the time, and had already been immortalized by another clueless adult, Grace, the wire-out sniffling secretary, Eddie McClurg, speaking of the hero in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But most of Heather's vernacular sprung fully grown from Waters' mind. It's deliberately incongruous and never appropriate, which is why posterity has been kind to the big green eyes of Shannon Doherty as she inquires, "Why are you pulling my dick?" Waters wisely gives a lot of his best lines to Veronica, who avoids the movie comedy pitfall of flavorlessly reacting to the craziness around here. "My teen angst bullshit has a body count. Swatch dogs and Diet Coke heads. Suicide gave Heather's depth, Curtis soul, and ram a brain." The catch is that these bon mots were nearly all written herself. Veronica is protagonist and the narrator of the film, and her journal is the recipient of her most insightful thoughts. Somewhere about 2/3 of the way into the film, she stops journaling, and it is then that she is able to break out of her complacency and proactively end the violence with one final burst of retributive violence. In this respect, she is a lot like Hamlet. Think of it. Any Shakespearean scholar will point out that Hamlet stops soliloquizing, stops talking to us, in effect, in Act 4. And that's when he's able to be at peace and avenge his father. As solipsistic as Heather's and all teen films can be, this one makes the point that all the journaling in the world won't save you when faced with real threats. The Shakespearean connection does not end there. "I came from a point of Shakespeare, I guess," Waters says when asked about the film's lingo. Shakespeare has a certain timelessness. I'm sure people didn't speak like that in the day, so I took a cue from Shakespeare in that let's create our own language. Let's not worry about if this is the way people really talk, which somehow always held up as what you should really strive for as a screenwriter. To a certain extent, yes, but a lot of times you do it half real, half horrid. It comes off wrong. So I had to commit to a stylized language from the get-go. Waters further points out, if you try to coddle the culture that's happening right now, what you think is happening, what you think is hip, it's kind of the light of the start from a planet that blew up 500 years ago. Which, of course, is even in 1985's Breakfast Club. Judd Nelson's devastating putdown of Anthony Michael Hall, neo Max Zoom dweeb, drew a reaction teetering between embarrassed laughter and head scratching. It was already a pretty dated term, dweeb, originating from the 1968 footnote. According to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, but 1972's, according to Oxford English Dictionary, chalk that up to the term originating from the States and taking a while to make it to the United Kingdom, when it was a variant of Phoebe, or an acronym for either dim-witted Eastern bore, or preferably dick with eyebrows. Maybe it sounded evergreen while it was being written. The slang in Heather's is also notable that it is spoken mostly by the girls, the jocks, and I'm adopting the film's archetypes here, with all due respect to high school athletes across the world, speak in grunts. The nerds stumble over the easiest sentences, and Jason notably rises above most of the slang. Oh, he has a way with his words, sure, but things are not very, and he does not ask about your damage. Footnote. Years later, on the Return to Westerberg High feature, in the 20th anniversary DVD, Water cops to stealing the phrase, What's your damage? From a camper back on his camp counseling days in Toronto. So technically, it's not American slang. And he is not concerned with whether or not you are pulling his dick. What are Waters and Lehman, we call them the co-authors of the film, saying about the way men and women talk to each other? When the men talk to each other, it's clear-cut, harsh, and homophobic. Doesn't this cafeteria have a no fags allowed policy? Answer him, dick. The aforementioned, that budwhopper stepped on my foot. Straightforward. Heard it before. Keep moving. Not much to see here. But the viciousness of the way the women talk to each other makes you cringe. Even awkward exchanges don't ring true. Heather Chandler. You were nothing before you met me. You were playing Barbies with Betty Finn. You got into Remington Party. What's my thanks? It's on the hallway carpet. I got paid in puke. Veronica. Lick it up, baby. Lick it up. Are incredibly specific in their unpleasantness. Maybe we're not all articulate in high school, but we can be pretty nasty. From an exchange with a dear friend in the 8th grade. Her. At least my mom doesn't make me go to her office after school like I'm a toddler. Me. At least my parents don't go to Europe and leave me behind. Nowhere is there a zinger as succinct as I got paid in puke. But there's a lot of sting in that absolutely true exchange. And amazing thing, I'm still friends with that girl. The viciousness of school fades, we forget, and even if we don't forget, it is understood that in high school, in this case junior high school, we were awful to each other, much more directly than we are as adults, and our verbiage was not catchy or poetic. When we did try to be hyper-articulate, we often fell tragically, comedically short. My friends and I tried our hand at our own slang, prior to and independent of Heather's. We'd been reading Hamlet in English class, and we were stuck, giggling by the term spake, as the past tense of speak. Sue us, we were 16, and it sounded like spunk, so it began. When someone said something true, we started proclaiming, Matt just spake sooth. This evolved into spake it, and we devolved to, when Matt said Fletch lives, sucked, he got spake all over me. Water style, and make no mistake, he has one, fits satire very well. Its exaggerated rhythms and overwritten emotional histrionics fit in well with Joseph Heller, or Matt Groening. When he writes a conversational popcorn movie, Hudson Hawk, on which he shared writing credit, he falls into thorny territory. His second and last collaboration with Michael Lehman, Hawk, is a heist movie, an action comedy, an attempt at being one of the great 80s action comedies, which include Midnight Run and 50% of all of Eddie Murphy movies. Yet Bruce Willis's smirky delivery of Waters' dialogue makes the whole show seem a little arc, and it's a little contrived. Lacking the social heft of Heather's or even Waters' later screenplay, including the soon-to-be-discussed Batman Returns, Hudson Hawk is nowhere near as bad as you might have heard. That it beat the Vanilla Ice vehicle Cool as Ice, and the Chevy Chase Dan Aykroyd clusterfuck Nothing But Tumble. For the Razzies that year is an OJ-sized miscarriage of justice. Lehman's big budget debut is slick and fast-paced, and my father went to his deathbed defending the film. No kidding. From his hospice bed in a lucid moment between morphine administrations, my dad and I were having a movie talk, and he said, "You know what's underrated? Hudson Hawk." But there's a reason I'm writing this book, and not that one. In a 2008 interview, Waters had charmingly glass-half-full hindsight perspective on Hawk. If any other writers would have done it, it would have been a mediocre action movie that we would have completely forgotten, but it took me to make the world's worst movie. A stop at the Snappy Snack Shack. An email interview with Heather number 1. After we broke up, Heather number 1 graduated, and we didn't see each other for about a year. The smoke cleared, I started dating, so did she, and she got back in touch. We've been good friends ever since. She saw Heather's on her own that spring, and thought the same thing I did. It's John Bowie's story, since he dated 2 Heathers. Bump. She also pointed out something really interesting to me when we were dating. Charlie Brown's iconic, unobtainable little red-haired girl is also named Heather. Heather number 1 lives in Brooklyn, almost has her master's in children's literature, and has worked in children's publishing for the better part of the decade. On her reaction to the first film. I'm sure this is only because it's my own name, but the name, both title and characters, Heather, has always seemed to represent this all-American, sporty, smart, kind, milk and honeyed ivory soap girl. Think Heathers, Locklear, Thomas, and Graham. So, to have a movie where this name represents girls who are anything but those positive things was just jarring and refreshing. And frankly, made me feel better about having landed somewhere in the middle between traditional Heathers and the filmed ones. On her recollections of your author from high school. Keeping in mind that we didn't meet until midway through my senior year, my memories of you in high school are admittedly slim. After we met, I do remember moments in class. That infamous, "You really don't know what we're doing here, do you, Mr. Bowie?" Footnote. An accurate quote from our shared Latin teacher, Mr. Siegel, with whom I now have a cordial Facebook relationship. Sic vita est. Jab in Latin. For example, I remember racking my brain at the time trying to place you in class. Where did we sit in relation to each other? Had we ever been in a group conversation? Did we have anyone in common? And it came up blank on all accounts. I'm not sure what that says about either of us. After meeting you, you became such an intense part of my life, however briefly. And the memories are a mixed bag, but mostly because of my own issues. You were this wickedly smart, funny guy who was so pop culturally aware, I really felt left in the dust. And I often still feel that way. But you also came across as needy and sometimes insecure, and trying so intensely hard to build a relationship that there was a fragility that came through. There was no way I could have articulated this back then, but that's what I remember. On her experiences in high school in general. High school was a weird time for me. I'd come from suburban Seattle and still had very close ties there. Having grown up all over the States, I really expected to have the typical suburban high school experiences. And humanities and New York City overall didn't allow for that. My friends in Seattle were living that all-American high school life, and I'd get reports from them, but there was a gulf between my New York City experience and theirs. They were reporting on marching band, homecoming games, driver's ed pep rallies, and here I was at school that was being run like a college. No band, no football, enjoying the freedom of a subway token allowed, staying out half the night, cutting school to hang out at the mat. One thing I did love about humanities was that it was run like a college, that we had core classes and electives, and that the electives were sometimes so off the wall. I also loved that there seemed to be several groups of cool kids in the suburbs. I think everyone constantly turns into jocks and cheerleaders, but for us, I think the swim team held as much social power as the Fleischigs kids. Footnote. A reference to the late drama teacher, Mr. Alan Fleissig. On where your author would have fit into the film. I don't think you are represented. I feel like there are groups in the film we don't see or get to know, and to get those groups, you'd have to composite the characters we do see. You might have to been a stoner parking lot kid crossed with the geek table with a dash of Peter Dawson. Number 1 paints a very accurate picture of high school and life in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. A high school that couldn't look less like Westerberg High. A sad side note on Peter Dawson. In earlier drafts, he is a venial hypocrite who pockets people's charitable donations. And there's that aforementioned massive subplot, so massive that I might have been misusing the term subplot. Let's just call it Act 2, wherein he forms the Genesis Club to draw positive attention to the school after the media blitz surrounding Heather Chandler's apparent suicide. In an unsettling bit of irony, the actor playing Dawson, Jeremy Applegate, the man who utters the line, "Dear Lord, please make sure this never happens to me because I don't think I could handle suicide," took his own life in 2000. Big Fun are tuneless Eurofags, the music of Heathers, and the phenomenon of teen suicide. There isn't any music, not in the way that you'd expect there to be a film in the 1980s. A pretty flawless decade for film soundtracks. Pick up the CD for Fast Times at Ridgemont High for a great diverse data dump of what the decades sounded like. Really diverse. There's Oingo Boingo, you'll find 2X Eagles, a great go-go B-side, and the one Jackson Browne song everyone can agree on liking. You're more of a new wave snob? Well, obviously you're going to want Valley Girl soundtrack or Pretty in Pink. The soundtrack to Heathers, only recently made available on iTunes, is limited to David Newman's electronic score. Newman's soon-to-be famed 20th Century Fox composer, Alfred Newman, How the West Was Won, The Seventh Year Itch, was apparently the guy to score your medium-budget 80s comedy. He also provided music for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Throw Mamas from the Train, and The War of the Roses. His extensive body of work continues to this day, but Heathers has a very specific sound. The artificial keyboard date the film, sure, but also provide the same kind of chill that can be found in John Carpenter's score for his own Halloween or Escape from New York. Notice how J.D. Blows Up echoes them. There's also 3 songs, actually only 2, but 2 versions of one of them in the film, and they are Set a Keen Tone. It opens with a lush version of Que Sera Sera, a Doris Day staple rife with 50s laissez-faire optimism. Though not initially recorded by her, Day made it famous by singing it in Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much. If you've seen the Hitchcock film, the song can spark some associative tension. And then there's just the delicious wit starting of the film in all of its violence and cynicism with the decidedly inappropriate lyrics. When I was a little girl, I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Your future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. Go ahead. Veronica, ask your mother, what will be? I doubt she'll be able to guess. It's important to point out that it is not Doris Day's version of the song that opens the film. Day vetoed the use of her version due to the film's profanity. What replaces it is a very faithful cover by New York City-based alt-folk Sid Straw. Straw has indie cred to burn. Her first album features collaborations with a then-hip Michael Stipe and young Matthew Sweet. So her cover doesn't need to strip the song down or tear it up. The strings are rich, she sings without winking, and most people think it is actually Doris on lead vocal. The film ends with the much more soulful version recorded in 1973 by Sly and the Family Stone. Lehman had considered using metal, which was going through a watershed phase at the time. Bands like Metallica and Megadeth were finding both their artistic and commercial footing, while in the UK, Iron Maiden was dishing out terrifically pompous mini-operas like Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. An appealing idea on paper, certainly, and fitting with the anger core of the film. Plus, the 80s were filled with suicide pacts that were blamed on metal. Watch the creepy documentary Dream Deceivers for a fascinating examination of Reno parents who try to blame Judas Priest for their abused children's suicide. But metal doesn't leave a lot of room for the subtlety or wit, and Lehman points out that it would have grinded against the film's dreamy aesthetic. A classic score was discussed, obviously. The two Kubrick nerds, Lehman and Waters, also next. As a temp soundtrack, Art of Noise was used, and interesting for a number of reasons. They fit the dreamlike atmosphere, and if memory serves, my girlfriend, Heather, too, used to listen to them as she was falling asleep. But the conventional route of peppering the film with contemporary pop hits never gained any traction, due to Lehman's fears that it would date the film so badly as current slang. The current version of Que Sera, Sera, recorded 16 years apart, float in and out of the film, never nailing down a diegetic time. The Sid Straw version was recorded in the 80s, but sounds like it's from the 50s, and the Sky Family Stone take, recorded in the 1973, adds an element of soul that seems incongruous, swelling up over the visual. A bloodied Veronica walking down a hallway as a wheelchair-bound Martha dump truck does donuts around her. The songs don't really fit, and that might be the point. Whatever will be turns out to be an unlikely pairing of people who are sitting out prom night, and maybe, just maybe, starting a new social order in the process. That's what will be. The film wasn't always going to take place in this music-free alternative universe. There are some misguided music references in earlier drafts, like the following exchange at the Remington College party. Brad, so what do you say we head up to my room and have a real party? I've got the best Windham Hills CD collection in the dorm. And later, Brad, excellent. Veronica, ever do cocaine? Veronica, ever since Phil Collins did that MTV anti-drug commercial, I refuse everything. Now, in 1989, Windham Hill connoted a very specific personality type, a faux sensitive, new age, aspiring yuppie who liked his music cranked up to 3 on some cherry Iowa speakers and really got what Mannheim's steamroller was in trying to do. However, Windham Hill was bought out by Sony in the mid-90s, like Iowa, as it turns out, and has not had a web presence since 2007. Obviously, Windham Hill joke makes me laugh, but I can't imagine too many people younger than me enjoying it. And then there's Kurt Kelly's drunken, fruitless come on to Veronica in the pasture. A wonderful deep focus shot. In foreground, Veronica comes up in the hill toward the camera. Middle ground, there's Kurt trying to get over the fence. Way too drunk to do so. Background, Ram. In no uncertain terms, date-raping Heather McNamara. The sole music accompaniment to this scene is Kurt's fucked up warbling of Marvin Gaye's semi-contemporary Sexual Healing. It's only 2 lines. We never hear the actual song, and the scene is such a perfect vignette of the worst rural high school date ever that we can hardly begrudge this one reference to music of the 80s. Besides, Water is too quick to point out. There's an instinct that Michael and I have. We will interrupt the integrity of the movie to go for the silly laugh. The other songs in Heathers, of course, is the fictional Big Fun. Footnote, not to be confused with the real Big Fun, a UK boy band trio who had a string of European hits starting in 1989, the year Heathers was released. Looking, well, a lot like the duo's Wham, Big Fun released a pablum like Can't Shake the Feeling on a willing British audience before disbanding in 1994. Hit Teenage Suicide, Don't Do It. Edits for budget or time somehow prevented Big Fun video, a huge part of early drafts, from being shot. But it was meant to be pretty much as you imagine it from Waters' first draft. 2 over gorgeous young men wearing trendy hair and trendy clothes stand before all white background, shouting, sing directly to the viewer. They are much like the duo Wham. The lyric to the hit in this first draft: times are mean for a teen, we know. Parents ignore, teachers bore, we know. But there is more than one way to go. Teenage suicide? Don't do it. And so on in that fashion. The song is kind of brilliant in its insanity, cashing in on a serious problem and offering the worst kind of Reagan era, this is harmful, avoid it, treacle as a solution. The song's banal lyrics somehow get funnier when you realize how dire the situation had become by the late 80s. According to the Child Welfare League of America, between 1952 and 1995, teen suicide rate tripled in the United States. It has hovered around 12% of all teen fatalities since. And it's important to note that a 1997 study by Youth Risk Behavioral Surveillance System revealed that 27% of females seriously considered suicide compared to 15% of males. Another reason why the film is so female-centric. The reasons for these terrifying statistics are sprawling, way too big to go into here. But you can take some economic, status, ethnicity. The problem is so much bigger among Native populations and less of an issue among African Americans, mental health, and dozens of other variables into account. And to this serious scourge, big fun offer. Razor blades and cyanide? Why try it? Off a jagged cliff in a raging tide? Why try it? What's being satirized here is not teen suicide, but the glib, reductive reactions to an incredibly complex problems. What's being satirized is Nancy Reagan's foolish and ineffective anti-drug campaign, and the people who tell visibly depressed teens to cheer up. I bristle whenever people suggest the film is pro-suicide, and laugh with Daniel Waters when he jokes, pro-suicide? If anything, it's pro-homicide. By this, he means that there's really only one suicide in the film, and it's the suicide of a homicidal maniac who has just killed a lot of really unlikable people. But what I mean is by pro-homicide is something more along the lines of sometimes I'd like to kill the dipshits who romanticize suicide in the sanctimonious nitwits who blithely advised against it. Waters has strong words for the attention that suicide is given by the media, and likens it to the credence they give school shootings that have cropped up in recent years. The way the media acted, this is how the menu, he says. This is similar to the line in Heathers. Whether to commit suicide or not is one of the most important decisions a teenager has to make. He elaborates, taking on the condescending tone of an ineffectual guidance counselor. You're feeling depressed, so we really recommend you do not kill 10 people at your school. This is not the way to talk about this. In his book, Suicide and Homicide Among Adolescents, Paul C. Hollinger even concedes that this increase in scientific literature on youth suicide has corresponded steadily increase in adolescent suicide rates. One wonders if teen suicide might be the only awful thing that might actually go away if we would just stop talking about it quite so much. Suicides often come in clusters, whether we do anything about them or not. Bergen County, New Jersey saw a spate in the years 1986 and 1987, while Heathers was being written, or at least revised, including a pretty famous case that I remember, in which 4 teens gassed themselves in a garage adjacent to an empty house. Their deaths had been triggered by the alcohol-related deaths of their friends, of which had the earmarks of suicide, depressed teens walking into ponds or oncoming traffic. The quadrupled suicide rate also led to copycat deaths, 2 in the same county, within the next month. in a contemporary article. Time magazine quoted the then president of the National Committee for the Prevention of Youth Suicide. "Kids see that this is a glamorous way to die, a way to get a lot of attention that they couldn't get in life. They see a kid that is a non-entity suddenly getting attention, and that is what they have been struggling for." And in the wake of this deeply unsettling crisis, here comes Teenage Suicide Don't Do It, written by North Carolina musician Don Dixon. Dixon, like Straw, had worked with Michael Stipe. He co-produced Rem Debut's Murmur and a host of other jangly 80s bands, including Smithereens and Guadalcanal Diary. Gone is the organic sound of those bands, replaced with the saccharine bounciness that is so untonably lame that comparing it to Wham, it is being unduly harsh to George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley. The drums are unmistakably fake. The keyboards, which are a kind of haunting Newman score, here comes off as just shrill. The lyrics are only slightly improved from Waters' draft. "My future looks dark 'cause my lights are out. Please pull this gun out of my mouth." Its only hook is its melodic sliding upward on the word suicide. It's only one of the most deliberately terrible songs ever written for a film. And I'm taking into account the actually quite catchy Spinal Tap numbers. It is not available on the soundtrack, but can be found in Dixon's solo record, If I'm a Ham, Well, You're a Sausage. I found a used copy on Amazon for $4. A statistic in U.S. fucking today. A quick word on the incident at Columbine High School. A teen suicide is followed by an endless exegesis. Dave Cullen's exhaustive book, Columbine, hit shelves 10 whole years after the massacre that ended with the two assailants' suicides. Every influence, every utterance, every article of clothing is picked apart in a typically hopeless quest for the trigger. What set this kid off? How did this happen? What did we as a society do wrong? Cullen's book is a compelling read, and it's not for me to say if it were to help stave off another similar incident, but I'm put off by the lengthy chapters on Erickson Harris's Dylan Klebold. The music they listen to, the books they read, the TV programs they watch are all analyzed, as are extensive chunks of their diaries and video journals. These are deep character studies, and by book's end, you have the queasy feeling of having spent a lot of time in their room with them. It's time that would have been better spent before they died and took 13 innocent people with them. And it's exactly the kind of attention they wanted. The only catch is that they're not around to bathe in it. One of the most chilling parts of the book is the discovery that they wanted to top the casualties of the Oklahoma City bombings, not because they idolized Timothy McVeigh or were as overtly racist as he was, or any of the idle conspiracy theories that popped up. They wanted to exceed McVeigh in carnage. That's all. No politics, no social critique, just excess. In his journal, Harris makes repeated references to the audiences of the impending massacre and the investigation, the head-scratching, the vague timelines, and the charts in USA Today. Even the universal enmity is just what a narcissist teen wants. And a lot of teens, suicidal or not, are really narcissistic. J.D. fits Cullen's profile of a psychopath. He, like Harris, is filled with a deep contempt for the people around him. J.D. treats his peers like paper dolls he keeps on his bookshelf, right on top of the 70s puberty guide, making sense out of sex, a new look at being a man. He is charming and deceitful, Eklug, and despite getting suspended for wielding a gun in cafeteria, no one suspects him for the genuine threat he is. He is also not the hero of the piece, Veronica is. He is a joke, a fraud, a wobbly James Dean wannabe who, like Harris, makes a bomb that doesn't quite work. JD has to smack the faulty timer to get it running again. Harris's father was in the army, and the young man had been uprooted several times before settling in Littleton. And JD's father drags him across the country from convenience store town to convenience store town. Harris was unusual among psychopaths in that he didn't start by unleashing his violence tendencies on animals. The one time we see JD's room, we make out that he keeps an empty rodent cage in there. Either the rodent is being mourned with an altar, his room left intact, or JD has done something to the rodent, or both. JD also has no plans to commit suicide. Harris and Klebold always expected to die, but they expected it to be at the hands of the police. When JD breaks into Veronica's room planning to win her back or else kill her, he finds her already dead, having faked her death in order to protect herself. In an admittedly hackneyed chunk of exposition, JD reveals to her apparently lifeless body his plan to blow up the school in the biggest staged suicide yet. He then fondly wishes that he and Veronica could have toasted marshmallows together in the school's flaming ruins. JD is not intending to go out in a blaze of glory. His mission is to kill all of his inferiors. In this regard, he is more of a textbook psychopath than Harris. Yet, his last moment on screen has him mimicking a Christ pose just before the dynamite strapped to his chest goes off. Unable to make a statement, unable to scare people into not being assholes, he dies, a martyr for a lost cause. But he already been shot, probably fatally, by a gun that he left in Veronica's room, thinking that she was dead. So the question remains, has he always expected to die, and if so, what for? Because he was alone in the world he hated? Because he, like Harris, thought he was God and despised everything around him? What works about the film now is that JD is refuted by Veronica, and that all of it makes so broad, so ridiculous, that I have the trouble believing that any sane person who sees the movie could seriously consider shooting up his or her school. For what? So people you didn't like can lionize themselves on local news? Veronica, in her dream sequence, spits at her by then ex-boyfriend. "You're not a rebel. You're fucking psychotic." JD breezily replies, "You say tomato, I say tomato." To JD, they're synonymous. And there's the creepy part of Heathers of the Columbine massacre. Every school shooting and disgruntled postal worker explosion, there are very, very sick people in this world. And some of them just think that they're badasses. On April 20th, 1999, Waters was in a meeting with his old producer, Denise Denovi, when the news came over CNN that there was some sort of siege going on in Littleton, Colorado. There had been a rash smaller school shootings over the past year, so Waters was as concerned as anyone that it was reaching an epidemic proportion, but didn't connect it to his work, until he found out that the shooter was wearing a trench coat, much like Jason Dean. Waters and Lehman both braced themselves for an onslaught of media attention, which never really came. There had been a more aggressive dream sequence in the execrable Basketball Diaries from 1995, wherein Leonardo DiCaprio pulls out a shotgun in his New York City parochial school and starts laying waste to the classmates and teachers. And just for the record, as of this writing, due to metal detectors and shit like that doesn't really happen in New York City schools. Lehman, in an interview with V Magazine, said, "I got really worried the day of Columbine. I had 3 or 4 messages on my machine. One from the New York Times, one from Time Magazine, asking me to comment. That freaked me out because I don't want to comment on Columbine. I don't know anything about what led to it. And what a horrible idea to think that this movie, made many years before, had contributed to these kids shooting a bunch of people in their school. Certainly made me think, but then I also went and did a little research to find out if any of these kids made any Heather references. Apparently there were none. That wasn't part of their vocabulary. They were enamored with Leonardo DiCaprio in the Basketball Diaries, but there were enough similarities to spook me. There are similarities, sure, and the kids, like all high school children, saw a lot of violent movies. Dylan Klebold wore a t-shirt showing Harvey Keitel from Reservoir Dogs in a yearbook photo, and he and Harris gave the day of their massacre the codename NKB, for Natural Born Killers. And despite all of that, who gives a shit? Tarantino is not an actionable position. I saw the nauseating cannibal holocaust in high school, and it didn't make me want to kill South Americans, because aside from garden variety depression, I'm not actually crazy. The film, Scream, with its violent, hyper-articulate teenagers, owes a great deal of debt to Heathers, and contains what I hoped would be the last word on this subject. Heroine Sydney, Nerve Campbell, discovers the killer's identity and confronts them with the line, "You sick fucks, you have seen too many movies." And one of the killers responds, "Now, Sid, don't go blaming movies. Movies don't make psychos, they just make psychos more creative." None of this stops anybody from looking into people's media consumption for clues after a tragedy. So it all rings very true when JD ingeniously plants a meaningful highlighted copy of Moby Dick in Heather Duke's room. During Veronica's dream sequence, we've seen Heather reading the book before. It's probably been assigned in class, and it's an onerous tome, certainly. One word highlighted, Eskimo, which is actually spelled Eskimox in Melville's book. Reading the word at Heather Duke's dream funeral, Father Ripper bemoans the loss of a girl who felt as if she was on an isolated tundra. Of course, Eskimo means nothing. It's a red herring planted by JD. But after something like this, after a tragic loss of life, we feel the need to ascribe meaning, significance to everything. The original draft of the script uses Catcher in the Rye as Heather's last testament, but JD's Sanglers balked at the idea. It's almost too easy. Catcher. It's an indictment of phonies. It's an ending in some sort of mental health facility. Moby Dick means less in the grand teen alienation picture, so using it as the big clue is even more absurd. When you finish Cullen's Columbine book, you realize that the massacre was about nothing but two genuinely crazy kids. Not goth music, not gun legalization, not bullying, just two sick children who did everything wrong in their otherwise normal quest for attention. Heathers came 4 short years after a highly rated TV movie called Surviving, which deals with the aftermath of a double teen suicide, perpetrated by Molly Ringwald and Zach Gallion. The parents are left to pick through the debris. There's something very exciting about that. Anyone who's ever considered suicide has probably had that flash of, everyone will be sorry, they won't realize how much they love me until I'm gone. And then the 80s saw a flurry of headline movies and after-school specials that dealt not so much with the gritty horrors of suicide as much as with its aftermath. The postmodern A Desperate Exit stars Malcolm Jamal Warner, whose life is recalled in flashbacks after he inexplicably kills himself. Made in 1986, this after-school special is a lurid mystery in the guise of cautionary tale. Its good intentions undercut by ridiculous plot twists. The budding writer was racked with guilt because he didn't stop another suicide. Depression had nothing to do with it. The other Keanu Reeves movie, Permanent Record, is all about the aftershocks of a young musician's suicide, and Reeves is left to contemplate the picturesque cliff where his friend ended his life. And it's before Reeves could act. Dead Poets Society came out a couple months after Heathers, but is one of the worst offenders, misunderstood by his parents, but loved by everyone else. budding actor Robert Sean Leonard has no choice but to end it all with his father's gun. Following the death, everyone, even his teacher, Robin Williams, weeps, and we are meant to realize what a gentle soul we had in the departed. Who wouldn't want that send-off? Maybe we've even felt a pang of jealousy over dead person's sudden spike of notoriety, deserved or not. Veronica points out that suicide gave Heather depth, Kurt a soul, and Ram a brain. And the media loves the image of artists who are too sensitive to deal with the world around them. The film skewers that phenomenon, but also points out how teenagers go absolutely apeshit around death. In my interview with Heather 1, she alluded briefly to Mr. Fleesig, our drama teacher at Humanities. He went on medical leave my senior year, and shortly after the school year started, it came down the wire that he had died of cancer. Everyone read between the lines, and as was suspected, he had died of AIDS-related Kaposi sarcoma. There was a certain class of indoor scarf-wearing drama kids who took the news badly, and I did too. He'd been a fascinating guy. Like most drama teachers, he also taught English, and I read Hamlet, a separate piece, Siddhartha, in his class. An alien teen tremurative, if there ever was one. So it sent shockwaves through the school, of course, especially with the added politicization of the death from AIDS. When drama students lose someone they love, you can only imagine the "I can't go on yet, I must go on" histrionics that take over. People sat in the auditorium crying over old yearbooks. I wrote a brief but maudlin dedication to him for spring's play program. But what struck me, and still does, was the way a lot of kids who never had his class, weren't in any of his plays, never knew the guy, jumped on the grief bandwagon. We had no suicides at my high school, but this death showed me that everyone in high school enjoys a good fad. Mourning was that year's side ponytail or tapered jeans. Why are you pulling my dick? Heather's as social satire. If the film works as satire at all, it's due to its reliance upon and then subversion of huge archetypes in high school, and by extension the world. The girls are the meanest, the guys are the dumbest, the teachers are so petty that they seem to be juveniles, becoming more and more peripheral as the film moves on. It's as ridiculous as the famous satire, A Modest Proposal, in which Jonathan Swift suggests the best way to cure Irish poverty is for the Irish to eat their own children. How better to combat high school classism than to kill the upper classes? Maybe that's an even more modest proposal. Waters has a great quote about Westerberg's high hegemony. The high school power center is female. At that age, boys are checkers and girls are chess. To elaborate, Veronica is chess, negotiating high school through communication strategy and occasional diversionary tactics. Her straight-faced participation in Heather Chandler's memorial service, for example. She compromises constantly, agreeing to the Remington party, the double date with Kurt, and eventually the double murder of Kurt and Ram. Chess is a more complicated game. Maybe you sacrifice a pawn to get a king. The male characters are simpler, less sophisticated, and ultimately less powerful. Anyone who is a parent to both a boy and a girl, as I am, will corroborate this. Boys are aggressive. Their strength is physical, whereas girls become verbal at a much earlier stage. Kurt and Ram are pushy and bullying. They're not really calling the shots. JD is very much checkers. This is my way. I will jump it. He is smarter, but as aggressive as Kurt and Ram. They are, in his way, literally cornering him in their first meeting in the cafeteria. His one attempt at psychological manipulation, getting Heather Duke to distribute his petition by threatening to make public childhood pictures of her socializing with Martha Dumtrick, is really just a way to cover up the biggest checkers move of all, blowing up a school with a Norwegian dynamite. Footnote. Big Bud Dean speaks of putting a Norwegian in the basement of a landmark hotel, probably a reference to Dino Nobel, the company that Alfred Nobel started in Norway, which, to this day, makes most of the world's dynamite. It's also telling that Waters regrets this scene more than anything in the film, finding JD's blackmail of Heather Duke a little too facile. The Waters wishes that Jason had been a little more Machiavellian in his technique, that he had played up the vacuum of leadership in the school after Heather Chandler's death. And yet, if one could go back in time and correct that one scene, Jason might have been given more depth and nuance than perhaps he deserves. The blackmail is vulgar, simple, and stunningly effective. It is, in short, Checker's move. You probably could not make a comedy called Jason's, since it would just look like a first-person shooter video game, Call of Duty set in high school. We're given a cursory explanation for Jason's psychosis. His dad's crazy. His dad is indirectly responsible for his mom's death, and he's moved around so much that he's never been attached to anything. It's really a horrible, sad story, and as such, Jason does not make this film a comedy. The film's humor comes from the verbal sparring, the equivocation, the vicious insults. It comes from people trying to build themselves up and curry favor by feigning compassion. The violence is shocking, and the sheer WTF nature of the first cafeteria shooting always makes me laugh. But it's not what we've signed on for. The film is named after the female characters for a reason. Now, having said that, it would be extremely easy to dismiss Waters and Lehman's as misogynists if you're the sort of freshman sock major who wants to see misogyny in everything. But while you might realistically be able to charge them with a certain degree of misanthropy in general, a particular hatred of women is far too simplistic of an accusation. Yes, the women, actually girls, are horrible to each other. But has the world not forced this mutual abuse on them? Are they not aping the men in power in an adult world? And isn't that why, when faced with dissent, Heather Duke calmly and confusedly asks, "Why are you pulling on my dick?" Where to start with that line? Obviously, she's trying to establish her masculinity, her alpha male status at Westerberg. But her power does not come from having a dick, even a metaphorical one. It comes from skillful chess moves, from strategy, from having something for everyone. It comes from her ability to pull off an old military jacket to talk to the potheads. She struggles with her femininity as such as everyone in the film does. Heather Chandler rules the school. But among the adults as college party, she is all but forced into a sex act that fills her with self-loathing. These women are trying to ape Checkers of men right down to their shoulder pads with ape the carriage of the football team. And that's the problem. The monocle that Veronica wears gives us a telling peek into her character and her melee with gender identity. A single corrective lens hanging from a chain was traditionally worn by men in the 1800s. This and her blue bathrobe was given a masculine quality that grows stronger once she stops journaling, which coincides with her becoming more Checkers. You know what I need? Cool guys like you out of my life. Bang! This obstructs me. Ergo, it must go away now. The monocle also corrects the vision of only one eye. It, like all of Heather's, doesn't give you the whole picture. The tragic part of the film is that for all the feminine strategy, manipulation, and subterfuge, it's the big, dumb phallus gun that saves the day in the school. Veronica stops her introspection and kills JD, one final murder that redeems her by preventing him from throwing the baby out with the bathwater and killing everyone, regardless of their guilt. Waters continued to tweak convention and correctness after Heather's. As a hot young screenwriter, he came into some weird assignments. His follow-up to Heather's was the Andrew Dice Clay vehicle and The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. Waters had been taken to see the Diceman in a small comedy club as the comedian's star was rising and found him, maybe naively, to be a brilliant parody of the male psyche. As Clay's concerts grew in size, so did his ego, and by the time cameras rolled, with non-comedy director Rennie Harlan at the helm, the film had gone through a lot of script changes that Waters had not approved, and that slipped through his fingers. The result is basically Fun Idea, a detective who exclusively solves rock and roll themed crimes, sullied by Clay's gay baiting machismo. Find the script online. There are some good moments. Despite a critical drubbling, Waters still had a fan in Tim Burton, whose production company, headed by Heather's producer, Denise DeVaughn. This confluence led to his assignment to write the script for the second and Burton's last Batman film. 1992's Batman Returns stars Michael Keaton in his last round in the title role and Michelle Pfeiffer as Selina Kyle, and her more famous alter ego, Catwoman. The comic book Catwoman made her first appearance in the first solo issue of Batman #1 as an unarmed cat burglar in a slinky suit, presented by creator Bob Kane as a romantic and criminal foil for the Caped Crusader. She's been given a bunch of origin stories: a former stewardess, she turned to crime after surviving a plane crash, or she fled an abusive marriage and resorted to burglary after her husband stowed her family jewels away in a safe, or she was a former prostitute who killed an abusive pimp. Writer Mindy Newell created an origin story wherein 13-year-old Kyle discovers that the hall administrator at her orphanage embezzling money, and she is swiftly punished for her knowledge. Like an unwanted cat, she is put out into a bag and thrown into a river. She escapes, blackmails the administrator, and embarks on a life of crime. It is this origin that Waters hews closest in his Batman Returns screenplay. Kyle is a timid secretary who discovers that her boss, Waters names the character Max Schreck, is working on a power plant that will drain Gotham City of energy. For her trouble, she is thrown out of a window and mysteriously revived by cats. Yet she is administrative assistant. Water omits the stuff about Selina being a child prostitute. He also places the blame for her conversion on a society that treats women so poorly. Catwoman. The world tells boys to conquer the world, and girls to wear clean panties. A man dressed as a bat is a he-man, but a woman dressed as a cat is a she-devil. I'm just living down to my expectations. Life's a bitch. Now so am I. It's a very sympathetic portrayal of a Batman villain, and Pfeiffer brings a slinky humanity to the role. She even appropriates Helen Reddy's 70s feminist anthem, "I am a Catwoman, hear me roar." Heather Chandler has learned this same lesson without being thrown out of a window. A wonderfully telling scene from an earlier draft illustrates this paradox, the clean, pantied alpha girl's lament. Veronica and Heather Chandler set themselves down with Betty Finn and her lookalike friends. Heather Chandler, voiceover. Look at me. I look great. I'm the girl in the commercials and the videos. Jocks table. Veronica and Heather Chandler's warily stands at the outskirts of the Jocks bastion of vulgarity. Heather Chandler, voiceover. I'm the blonde in the bikini on the horse holding the Pepsi can. Int. Stoner's hallway. Day. In a dark, smoky hallway, Veronica and Heather Chandler cough toward a bunch of stoners in tattered forms of dress. Heather Chandler, voiceover. I'm the princess being spanked on the throne by Billy Idol's guitarist guitar. Int. The foodless fund stand. Day. Veronica and Heather Chandler accost Peter Dawson at the foodless fund stand. Heather Chandler, voiceover. What do I get out of being friends with losers? I give them a piece of a winner and they stain me with loserness. Note that the sadomasochist imagery here, even the beauty gets punished by the beast, Billy Idol. If we expect women to be pristine and pretty, how can they not snap? Or, at the very least, how can they not exert that pressure on people around them? And if we can't take it, if we buckle under the pressure like Veronica, or worse, Betty Finn, if we simply put, can only lose, can we fault Heather or Catwoman for trying to win? It's these paradoxes that help the film succeed as a satire. Take the exchange between JD and his father. JD and Veronica are sitting on the couch, watching TV. The script has them watching The Brady Bunch. The film has them watching news coverage of Heather Chandler's death. Big Bud Dean enters and is greeted by his son with, "Why, son, I didn't hear you come in." Big Bud replies, "Hey, Dad, how was work today?" They continue in this fashion. Big Bud reveals all sorts of unsavory facts about his line of work. He blows up landmarks for new developments, etc. And the exchange ends with, JD, "Jason, why don't you ask your little friend to stay for dinner?" Veronica, awkwardly standing, "My mom's making my favorite meal tonight. Spaghetti, lots of oregano." JD, "Nice. Last time I saw my mom, she was waving out of a window of a library in Texas. Right, Dad?" Big Bud Dean stops rowing to grin at, "You think you're tougher than me, but you're not," smile to JD. Big Bud dead sick. "Right, son." Couple things. That's pre-final draft typo is pretty fascinating. The D is actually not that close to the N on the keypad. And while I really try not to accuse people of the Freudian slip too often, Big Bud Dead might have to be an exception. It reeks of the author's deep-seated aversion to authority, but the larger issue to the pure satire at work here, Gilbert and Sullivan's might have loved the topsy-turvydom of this running gag, with one notable exception. The kids are smarter than the adults, or at the very least, Veronica and JD are smarter than everyone else, and this is embodied in the clear linguistic role reversal of JD and Big Bud Dead's sick relationship. And then, all of a sudden, JD drops the bit to show real vulnerability. He is a son who lost his mother. It might be the only time we see him as a human being. It might be the only time that Waters and Lehman sell out a joke to show some integrity. When last we hear from Jason's dad, he's continuing the role reversal charade, trying to get his son's attention while Jason constructs one of his bombs. The last time we see guidance counselor Pauline Fleming, performed flawlessly by Penelope Milford, she is unloading her final bit of prefab wisdom on Veronica. The previously quoted, "Whether to kill yourself is one of the most important decisions a teenager has to make." And Veronica replies, "Get a job," to the guidance counselor, whose job it is to make sure her students can find jobs. All of this role reversal and role questioning leads us to the line. The line that, just once, makes the adults smarter than the kids. The line that gets repeated so often that we stop wondering if it's true and just click our tongues to accept it as part of who we are, our sad destiny. Veronica can't believe how irrational her school is acting following the deaths of Kurt and Ram, and she explodes at her parents. "All we want is to be treated like human beings!" And her mom, in her sole moment of cogent clarity, shoots back. "Treated like human beings? Is that what you said, little miss voice of a generation? Just how do you think adults act to other adults? You think it's all just a game of doubles tennis? When teenagers complain that they want to be treated like human beings, it's usually because they are being treated like human beings." It's the moment in Heather's screening where everyone gets a little quiet and pensive, where the movie stops, revealing in shock value and kicking sand in the face of pussy John Hughes movie, and makes its point. The point isn't that kids are killing each other in this movie, or that the adults don't get it, but it's far more disturbing. It's that people kill each other all the time in real life, and that bonds of empathy are troublingly thin. The line flew over my head at the time, but every time I get to that familiar sting from not being invited to a party or slighted by gossip, and I'm in my very late 30s at this writing, that line rings in my head like a horrible gong. Do we ever graduate? Do we ever pass? Waters is proud of the line, sure, but he knows it can be used as a cop-out. If high school never ends, we're free to be two-faced, shameless dicks to each other forever. He points out that the adage, real life is like high school, has become so ingrained that it's kind of given people a pass. Waters points out that there is a lot of great college movies because the raw emotions are starting to be either repressed or controlled depending on your worldview. He believes college was invented to keep 18 to 22-year-olds off the streets. So this viciousness might not be overt, but it's there. Witness the snarky comment about certified adult Tom Tancredo at the beginning of the book. So it's this line and its downright elegiac delivery by actress Jennifer Rhodes that keeps me coming back to the film. Heathers works as a satire by using the high school as a society trope, maybe even creating it, and following it through to its logical conclusion, or falling just short. Maybe the school should blow up at the end. Maybe the school should self-destruct because school is society. Or maybe it should end on a hopeful note. When JD, bloodied and bruised and missing his middle finger, Veronica having shot it off, declares, "Let's face it, the only place different social types can genuinely get along with each other is in heaven." It's clearly a line left over from the earlier Prom in Heaven draft, yet Lehman has slyly intercut the fight scene between Veronica and JD with scenes from the pep rally going on above the boiler room in the school's gymnasium. The effect? Sure, we're building suspense in a John Frankenheimer way. The DVD director commentary tips the hat to Black Sunday. But there's something else going on. Everyone gets a close-up. Rodney, Betty Finn, Peter Dawson, with a heretofore unseen girlfriend, Heather Duke, all of them together, all of them enjoying themselves as they cheer on Westerberg Rottweilers. Maybe JD's way isn't the way as appealing as it might initially seem. After all, society has survived against all odds. Since Mesopotamia in 5,000 BC? There are existential threats that come along every couple decades, but they're inevitably followed by heroes rising to cool things off, to steer mankind away from annihilation, to restore peace and order. We can only hope that a real leader will step up, grab the scrunchie, and use it for the greater good. Hitler threatened Churchill, and Churchill prevailed. Then Churchill threatened Gandhi, and Gandhi prevailed. Veronica threatened high school, but when JD threatened Veronica, she saved high school. If you wonder why I've just placed Ryder's character among such hollowed political company, you need only ask yourself if there's any situation in the world more petty and venal than an American high school. A hint, it's obliquely referred to in the introduction of this very book. In an email, Water elaborates very briefly on his short-lived plan for a sequel. Very softly spitballed something to Winona when she would be a Senate page to a Senator Heather something, played by Meryl Streep. Intrigue ensues. Don't remember much else except that Christian returns in Obi-Wan Kenobi ghost capacity, and Winona ends up having to save, then assassinate the president, which is a good thing. It was all very quasi-sick. But the punchline is that I ran into Winona a couple months later, and she said, "I talked to Meryl Streep at a party." And she's totally in. A stop at the snappy snack shack. Amy Poehler on Heather's influence. Amy Poehler co-founded Upright Citizen Brigade, spent 7 years on Saturday Night Live, for which she was twice nominated for an Emmy, and has starred in several feature films, including Mark Waters' Mean Girls, the mother of 2 young boys. She also has recently relaunched the web series and social networking site Smart Girls at the Party, smartgirlsattheparty.com. On Mean Girls and Heathers. Mean Girls was so funny because the script was so great, and it was filled with great jokes. It hit on the universal message of, what group do I belong to? The face-to-face bullying shown in movies like Heathers and Mean Girls almost seem old-fashioned these days, with the cyber shit saying mean things to a person's face is almost charming. The way people can anonymously hurt someone or systematically spread rumors about someone is out of control. I would have never imagined that the same girl who tortured you at your locker in school would be the same girl who tortured you in cyberspace. Only she'll go by the name Orange Slice 27. On being a parent in this world, every girl has a moment in school where everyone hates her. It's bizarre. It's like wandering virus that hits every girl between 4th and 5th grade. Trying to figure out why it's your turn is useless. The best thing you can do is keep your head down and be yourself. That's why I started Smart Girls at the Party. I wanted to create a website that celebrated regular girls who changed the world by being themselves. In all honesty, the only artillery that works. We need to encourage girls that whatever they like is cool. Whatever they are good at is what they should keep doing. Whoever they can be themselves around are the friends they should keep. The extreme always seems to make an impression. The performance in Heathers. As directors go, Michael Lehman is very hands-off. He's very careful in the casting process, so when the cameras roll, he can stand back and let the actors bring themselves into the part. Patrick LeBreutreau, the actor who played Ram, speaks fondly of Lehman's approach. He would set a shot and then he would read the paper. The blood, sweat, and tears in the casting process were shed mostly by the actors. Ryder lobbied hard for her role. She insisted she had a personal connection to the script. A girl at her Petaluma, California high school had gained instant, stunning popularity after killing herself, much the way Heather Chandler does in the film. Winona, soon-to-be ex-agent, dropped to her knees, begging her not to do the film. But once Family Ties, Justine Bateman, and Labyrinth's Jennifer Connelly passed, the role was Ryder's. Casting JD obviously took time. They needed a likable, charming, but believably psychopathic teenager. 2 of the sides script excerpts used for auditions were from the scene in which JD walks in on what he thinks Veronica's hanging corpse, and the other was the scene in which JD and Big Bud greet each other by calling each other their own name. The reason for picking these scenes are pretty clear. If an actor can handle the mouthful of words in JD's big monologues, when our school explodes tomorrow, it's going to be the kind of thing that infects a generation. A Woodstock for the 80s. A dance along to an irony of a boy addressing his father as Tiger. Clearly, he's worth considering for the part. Slater relishes the dialogue, bringing his now trademark, "Then wait, what is this kid doing?" Jack Nicholson delivery to JD's increasingly sinister talk, and Lehman recalls being a little more hands-on with Slater initially, questioning the good sense of what sounded like a 5 easy pieces of Jack's impressions. Slater pointed out, "That's how I talk," and history has proven him right. That said, according to a 2008 interview, he did model some as aspects of his performance on Nicholson's satanic turn in The Witches of Eastwick, a favorite film of Slater's. Eastwick had just come out 2 years before, and it ties nicely with Waters' initial screenplay idea, a high school girl falling in love with the Antichrist. Lehman nods to this quietly when JD introduces the petition, and his face is framed by the flames of a burning photograph. The film took the quirky girl from a couple decent movies, found her inner Natalie Wood, and sent Winona Ryder on a course that has included working with some of the greatest American directors and garnering an Oscar nomination. Her performance in Heathers is so informed by her wardrobe, the bruised palette discussed earlier, that she barely has to speak. But speak she does. She has dense chunks of dialogue, all of it overwritten, yet all of it sounding like it just popped into her head. Waters is right to talk about her wobbly characteristics. Beautiful though she may be, there has always been an uncertainty about her, and that, coupled with her real-life penchant for dating guys in pretty good bands, has made her geek bait for the entirety of her career. For a while in the 1990s, it seemed like every third band had a song about her. Slater and Ryder staged a fake romance while publicizing the film. They even claimed to have been married in Vegas. Their plans was to go further and stage a huge public vows, basically tweak the whole gossip machine. Then Ryder became engaged to Johnny Depp, and that era of mischief ended. Heathers is, in my opinion, unique among 80s comedies in that there really are no weak links in the cast. There are really no small roles in the film, and everyone gets a moment to shine, endows his or her scene with a tiny bit of personality and idiosyncrasy. Lisanne Falk, Heather McNamara, was a teen supermodel with a couple tiny acting credits to her name, and her performance is wonderfully vulnerable and wounded. She looks like she's barely holding it together in most scenes. She makes you laugh while breaking your heart in the scene where she calls into a radio advice show, Hot Probs. Her attempted suicide is seen later, and her recovery at the hands of Veronica gives the film a sincere, irony-free, warm moment. Kim Walker, positively serpentine in the role of Heather Chandler, and when she spits out, "Fuck me gently with a chainsaw," one has the distinct fear that she could handle it. She's not all sadomasochist strength, however. After she's been sort of consensually violated by a Remington college boy and she's trying to wash her mouth out, she gives a shattered look into the mirror and spits mouthwash into her reflection. It's a pretty raw and honest moment in an otherwise glib film. It works all the more because Walker had an amazingly aloof look to her. So much so she played another iconic teenager on the short-lived TV series based on S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders. She portrayed head sock Sherry Valance. Anyone familiar with Heathers' DVD supplementary knows that Walker, the actress who utters the line, "Did you have a brain tumor for breakfast?" died of a brain tumor in 2001. Penelope Milford had earned an Oscar nomination for her role in another film rich with commentary, Hal Ashby's 1979 Coming Home, a no-holds-barred indictment of the Vietnam War in particular and macho histrionics in general. It's a fine-tuned, nuanced, nomination-worthy performance, but it gives a little indication that she can be funny. And from the moment her Pauline Fleming saunters into frame, glasses a-string, Kafkan akimbo, she has us laughing at her personal hell that is actually made of good intentions. What starts as a sensible attempt to get the teachers to acknowledge the tragedy of suicide turns into a disgusting self-serving attempt to honor self-destruction. To, as Waters says, put it on the menu. And the only thing funnier than Milford is the just wants to watch football principal with his caustic dismissal, "Thank you, Miss Fleming. You call me when the shuttle lands." The principal is played by John Ingle, who knew a thing or two about being in a faculty meeting. He taught drama at Beverly Hills and Hollywood high schools for 20 plus years. He retired in 1984, then launched an acting career. His credits include hundreds of hours of soap operas and a lot of very convincing work in stern teacher roles. Patrick Liberatro Ram has one of my favorite takes from the movie, maybe of all movies. It's perfectly silent moment during the scene in which he and Kurt comforts JD in the cafeteria. Kurt asks his friend, "Doesn't this cafeteria have the no fags allowed policy?" Ram stares off into the middle distance, unable to discern the rhetoric or irony, or really anything that's not right in front of him, his quizzical eyes seemingly asking, "Does the cafeteria have no fags policy?" Footnote. One more thing about this scene. It appears in an excellent 1995 documentary, The Celluloid Closet, a moving explanation of gay portrayals in cinema during a montage film characters of using the word faggot. While I agree that any word can be overused, it should be pointed out that the word is used in this context by two very unlikable characters who are very swiftly punished for their bigotry. Lebetro was a child star who attended the Valley of Professional School, an institution for child performers, both actors and figure skaters. A typical class would star Lebetro, Janet Jackson, Corey Feldman, and Brian Boitano. A school filled with drama kids and ice skaters has very few bullies per se, but he still remembers how Jason Bateman got thrown out of the trash can a lot. Mark Carlton has exactly one scene as Kurt's dad. But if you're gonna have just one scene, make it one where you utter a line loved by many. "I loved my dead gay son!" The scene works well because he's not playing it for laughs. The character's intolerance is on display, and Lehman wisely undercuts the joke by casting a glance at Kurt's little sister, crying in her pew. The family is broken, but maybe they've grown more sensitive in the process, and Veronica gets to see the real cost of scarring people into not being assholes, as JD puts it. Another great performance moment comes at the film's end as Veronica begins to put together JD's plan. She stops Rodney, John Matthews, and one of the geeks to ask where everyone is going. He tells her the student body is heading to the pep assembly in the gym. Click. Her detective hat goes on, and she asks, "What's beneath the gym?" Rodney goes through a very quick and mistaken epiphany. If she's asking me about where the basement, she must want to fool around there. With a voice full of hope and as much flirtation as he can muster, he murmurs, "The boiler room?" Which is just what she fears, and she leaves him standing there in the hallway. I remember passing notes back and forth with girls and wildly misinterpreting them, too. My hand to God, that hot Asian girl in social studies was flirting with me, and it turns out she was really, really not. The vain hope in Rodney's voice is so true and pure, I practically have to watch the scene through my fingers. A stop at the Snappy Snack Shack. The quotable Daniel Waters. Daniel Waters is an enjoyable interview and a fun eccentric. He's never learned how to drive, and he lives in a city where that's practically a misdemeanor. And he doesn't like just anywhere in Los Angeles. He lives in Hollywood Hills house where Orson Welles spent his last years, and in fact, died in 1985. Among the many great quotes the man can offer, here is one he gave the Los Angeles Times regarding living in Welles' house. "I wanted to get that Citizens Kane mojo. Instead, I'm hanging out with Henry Yoglum, doing wine commercials and magic tricks part of his life. I mean, I did enjoy my life, but come on, where's my touch of evil?" Here's Daniel Waters on life after high school. It's amazing. Obviously, there were cliques. Obviously, there were people who made fun of, but now you look at Facebook and The people who stayed in Indiana, they're all friends. They all know each other. They send each other Starbucks gift certificates. And it's like, wait a minute, you can send? He's a nerd. The public initial reaction to the film. People in their 20s and their early 30s, they respond to the movie right away. Teenagers, it was 50-50. A lot of them worshipped it. It's the only movie I know that people really like, but the first time they saw it, they hated it. I don't hear that about any other movie. I've gotten to talk to some other people, and it's kind of like when you film a child crying, and then you show the child crying the film, and they're not going to be amused by that. In high school, I was all perspective. I almost like an avatar in my own high school. But a lot of people didn't respond to it. They thought, I can't deal with this right now. I can't deal with this right now. And then later on, they came back to it. It's funny. I'm having a great romantic success with women who were teenagers when Heathers came out. A new skill set. Heathers' box office. We did amazing in New York. We did amazing in 2 real theaters in LA. But New World felt that, and New World was really financially strapped. So they released in like 50 theaters in LA, which was a mistake. Rancho Cucamonga, no one's going to see the movie. If they would have just kept the platform release, footnote. A platform release is when a studio opens a film in just a few theaters and a couple of major cities to build buzz, and then rolls it out countrywide. Recent examples include Brokeback Mountain, Frost Nixon, anything that Lars von Trier inflicts on the public. He trails off a little ruefully. And then, they can't afford advertising. Heathers is really funny because it played in more separate theaters than any movie I can remember. It just never quite left LA. The battle was lost before the army took the field. As far as New World being out of business, they released one movie called Under the Boardwalk, and that was it. That was the ball game. Footnote. In fact, New World made one more film but went under before its release and sold it off to Triton Pictures for distribution. Meet the Applegates, directed by Michael Lehman, was rushed into production before the script was ready, and all parties paid dearly for it. Lehman has called the experience humiliating. If you talked to me 10 years after Heathers, I was much more bitter. It should have been a hit. Now fans will say, hey, my God, aren't you lucky that you got to make Heathers? I feel kind of the same way. I'm just happy to get out of Saigon. The fact that we got released is insane. Amazing. If this movie was made today, it probably wouldn't be made today. And B, who knows what would happen. There's no New World anymore. Switches to Sage Film executive voice. Independent film is neither independent nor film. Ouch. The lunchtime poll. The reaction to Heathers. Heathers received pretty mixed reviews upon its initial release. There were the typical outcries, accusations of irresponsibility from the squares who were never going to get it in the first place. But even some viewers who should have enjoyed the film, who should have realized it was talking right to them, turned on it. Roger Ebert gave it a lukewarm 2.5 stars, asking, is this a black comedy about murder or just a cynical morality play? Now, I like Ebert a lot, but he's the rare critic for whom you can follow the standard report, well, let's see you write a movie, with, oh shit, you did, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And it's one of the most creepily misogynistic films I've ever seen. And I'm including all the other Russ Meyer films. Ebert's uncharacteristic cluelessness about Heathers, it can be both a morality play and a black comedy, most good satires are, recalls the shrugging reviews given to Bonnie and Clyde upon its release. Footnote. Easy there, movie cop. No one is comparing Bonnie and Clyde to Heathers. I am, however, comparing their initial critical reactions. Now go back to your dog-eared copy of Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, and stop glaring at me. That is, given to that film by most critics, with the notable exception of Pauline Kael. Kael made her mark as film critic by being one of the very few writers who got what the seminal film was trying to do. Fuck with our expectations and twist the archetypes so far as to make them unrecognizable. Of Bonnie and Clyde, she said the film keeps the audiences in a state of eager, nervous imbalance. Waters is thrilled that Kael reviewed his film, even though she didn't really like it. The young, inexperienced director, Michael Lehman, didn't find the right mood for the gags, she wrote. That's how much of an unrepentant film geek Waters is. There's a certain tragic, yeah, she hit me, but that means she cares quality about the way he speaks of her review. He also fondly quotes an obscure review from a long-dead magazine called Model, which read, Waters is chilling in what he assumes to be common ground. What does that say about Waters? For that matter, what does that say about me? Here I am trying to desperately convince you of the universality of getting mugged in Ed Koch's New York and then trying to tie it into a 20-year-old cult movie that finally made its money back. Oh, a couple weeks ago? Maybe there's something chilling about what I assume is common ground. Speaking of New York, in its paper of record, Janet Maslin complained about Heathers, claiming that the film shifts after the death of Kurt and Ram. It is about this point that the gorgeous, petulant Veronica begins to wonder just what is going on. And it's about this point that the film loses its nerve, demanding that Veronica wake up to the awfulness of what JD has done. But why not now, Janet? 3 murders seem to have a good time to realize that things have gotten out of hand. And there is a magic number in comedy, which is to say, 2 instances of anything you should establish a pattern. Veronica's unwitting conspiracy in the murder of Chandler and Ram. And then you break the pattern in shock value for comic effect. Veronica shoots Kurt dead. It's her point of no return. It makes us gasp. Waters bristles when people accuse his film of copping out at the end, since he points out 98% of teen movies are as a cop-out from beginning to end. But if anything, reading the negative reviews has actually strengthened my resolve. Fun-eating Chicago Reader film critic Jonathan Rosenbaum is so joyously dismissive of Heathers, you don't know whether to buy him a drink or take him into the woods behind the school and shoot him. Rosenbaum writes, The real narrative force behind this movie is nihilist camp. As in Roger Corman's 1966 The Wild Angels, but without the same degree of filmmaking skill. Hang on, Jonathan. Let's not type anything rash. Kick the gun over to me. Now I like Roger Corman a lot. But have you seen Wild Angels recently? I have, and I teetered uncomfortably between ennui and mortification throughout the viewing. It's not to compare a movie of Heathers' craft and deliberate technique to genuine exploitation film. I'm using the word as pejorative as a fan of the genre that has not as aged well as you think. Somehow, film that contains a scene as offensive as Diane Ladd's rape on a church altar takes forever to get there, padding its first 2 acts with faux badassery and actually making you think that the tasteless degradation of Laura Dern's mom happened sooner. And furthermore, remember the way that your parents sounded when they talked about Wild Angels? How they thought it was trash and a sign of declining mores? Get their voices in your head, and then reread your review of Heathers. My Heathers poster, Veronica and JD coddling over my head as I went to sleep every night of freshman year, had pull quotes from sources of diverse as Daily Variety. The film's sword has as many edges, all of them razor sharp, as Cosmopolitan. What will take you by surprise is the remarkably high level of intelligence, humor, and outrage. People got it, or at least got what it was trying to do, and gave it a lot of points for even attempting it in the era of George Bush's first. Anything worth writing about is usually decried in its time, and history has been kind to Heathers. Just a quick glance at the DVD cover will remind you that Entertainment Weekly called it the best high school black comedy ever made, which I guess ranks it above The Election, and I don't know, it's pretty lame ripoff Jawbreaker, 60s cult oddity, Lord, Love, and a Duck. Hard to say, but Heathers is viciously quotable, and it just keeps coming up among people my age. When I casually referenced Sarah Palin as Mean Girl on Twitter, a friend pointed out how lucky that made us. After all, he said, if she got her shit together, Sarah Palin could be a Heather. Which is a good point about Mean Girls. Lehman was offered the script and wisely passed, knowing that even if he nailed it, it would just look like a retread of his first feature. The film was directed by Daniel Waters' younger brother, Mark, whose tuition at the American Film Institute had been paid for by Daniel. It's a solid teen comedy with well-observed characters, but with its pedigree and its trio of vicious pretty girls, it begs comparison to Heathers. And it doesn't quite have the edge, nor can it afford to. It takes place in a very much in our world, and if somebody pulled a gun in a movie or said fuck me gently with a chainsaw for that matter, it would feel abrupt and terrible and not broad and satirical. The dialogue is funny, but not terribly stylized, and it isn't trying to be a huge satire of society at large. Grounded though it may be, it's asking the same question: why are young women so mean to each other? Tina Fey points out to a girls' PE class in a preachy but well-intentioned moment, "You all have got to stop calling each other sluts and whores. It just makes it okay for guys to call you sluts and whores." When discussing his movie, Waters often comes back to the metaphor of the Island of Misfit Toys, a location from the 1964 animated special Rudolph and the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The Misfit Toys are just that. Trucks with square wheels, a cowboy who rides an ostrich, and their appeal is that they are original, completely their own thing. Sex and Death 101 is the gun that squirts grape jelly. You don't necessarily need it, but it's pretty cool. When it comes to cinema, he elaborates, I feel like we live in a world where originality is only appreciated when it's an originality that is completely familiar and comfortable. Mean Girls, Juno, Gossip Girl, the Scream movies, Glee, one of Waters' favorite TV shows. Pretty much any time teenagers don't sound like teenagers but are still compelling and funny, they ought to send the check to Waters. He cheekily acknowledged that the film is so influential he wishes people would watch some other movies. There's a terrific rumor that he's heard that an Emmy-winning writer once spent a year in therapy lamenting that the fact that he'd never write anything as good as Heathers. It crawls under people's skin, and in my case, has stayed there for 20 plus years. I reached Heather number 2 via Facebook. She moved out of New York and has a good-looking husband and 3 kids, and initially didn't want to be interviewed. She claimed that she didn't really like the film the one time she saw it. I don't remember why, which shows how much real attention I was paying to the situation. I remember being very nervous, very insecure around her. She did nothing to perpetuate this, but I would clam up around her friends, especially her invariably tall, well-dressed male friends. We bonded initially over movies, and I specifically remember us exchange after we had seen both James L. Brooks' broadcast news over the weekend. We enjoyed it, and she could not understand how Holly Hunter would be interested in William Hurt when Albert Brooks was so clearly into her. If I were the sort of person who says, wow, I am in there, that would have been a great moment for it. We would go see a lot of movies. Working Girl, Dangerous Liaison, Say Anything. A pretty entertaining year for movies now that I think of it. And frankly, have a lot of sex, which she always called making love. A phrase that is just mind-blowing when you're 17. But we never really got to know each other. We were from different sides of the tracks. I live in a teensy apartment in Hell's Kitchen. She lived in a monster brownstone in the East Village. She was planning on going to Europe that summer and wanted to be free. We looked wildly different. She was beautiful and always well put together. I was cute at best and seemed to go out of my way to dress terribly. We were heckled on the street once by a young man who asked a little too loudly, "What are you doing with him?" There were, oddly enough, shades of Diane and Lloyd from Say Anything in the relationship. Only her parents were not stealing from old people, and I was not invited to Europe. So, yeah, there was a 5-month sell-by date stamped on the relationship, and I am not knocking the experience. It certainly beats seeing Say Anything alone or with any of my long-haired let's set off firecrackers in the schoolyard friends. But there was also a part of me that subconsciously or otherwise didn't see the point in really getting to know this person, this beautiful cipher. I liked her parents. She had a pool table. She would trounce me every game, and I found it erotic. She introduced me to Cat Stevens, Otis Redding, and Ella Fitzgerald, and I made her a ton of mixtapes and brought her cheap flowers, carnations, as I recall. But I spent most of our torrid senior year protecting myself. And when Josh and Jillian told everyone that we were dating, Heather number 2 became, to my mind, disproportionately upset. She liked her privacy, and I mine, sure. But I figured, worst case scenario, a few people who usually ignored me would discover I was making love with the hottest girl in the 12th grade, who was also a member of the National Honor Society, and had graduated early due to her excellent grades. Oh, and the entire bottom floor of her brownstones was her. And such she was a 17-year-old who basically had her own apartment. So suck it, world. On the other hand, now everyone also knew that Heather number 2 was dating the funny guy who used to wear 2 unmatching suits. Nobody else does it, and wore a red, green, and yellow dread bag over his long, uncombed, but not dreadlocked hair, and had terrible posture and often acted like he was smarter than everyone else, even though he was conspicuously not in the Honor Society. So maybe she had her reasons for being discreet. Most of the booster ads in the back of our school yearbook were a half page written by parents. "Mordecai, we're so proud of you. Congratulations, yes, Sina." That sort of thing. Then there were the cheaply constructed pre-Adobe ads from local businesses. Pretty standard yearbook stuff. Heather and her friends, all whom I knew casually, none of whom I'd ever say visited at home, took out a full-page ad, a collection of glamour shots of the school's better-looking students just posing in Central Park, framed by trees. In the middle of the page, a group shot and the inspired lyrics of the Terry Jacks hit Seasons in the Sun. "Goodbye to you, my trusted friends," etc. My senior quote, for the sake of comparison, came from the Dead Milkmen. "This world is full of people who think a lot about bowling balls." Neither one is particularly insightful, but there's a lot of real estate between the two sensibilities. On the side of Heather's friend's full-page ad, they placed a short legend. "What are we playing? Thumper! What are we playing to get up?" Bumper is a drinking game wherein everybody has their own hand signals and people pass the turn around the table by using someone else's hand signal. If you miss your signal, you drink. I hated Thumper with an irrational white-hot passion. When I was straight edge, I thought it was retarded, but now that I drink, often with occasional abandon, I just don't get drinking games. Why play around? Why not just drink? I remember writing a short story about a group of teens who got playing the game and are taken off to re-education camp. Footnote. Can't find the story. Hopefully, I had a good sense to throw it out. The Thumper people would often look right past me as if I wasn't there and stride down the hallway, perfectly coiffed and always wearing their jeans tucked into their socks. And here was my quasi-girlfriend, gone to Europe by the time the yearbook came out. On a page with the Thumper people. Now, here's what's weird. I never saw her play Thumper. Maybe she hated it too. Maybe she wasn't any more of that group than I was. Maybe that's why we dated in the first place. Why didn't she like the film? For a while, I could only guess. Heather wore black scrunchie. Ooh, what does that mean? And became very self-conscious about it as we left the theater that night on March of 1989. Somebody in the row ahead of us pointed out her hair accessory and she laughed, saying, "Yes, I'm a Heather." And the guy turned his finger into a gun and shot her. Kind of flirtatiously, if you ask me. So that had to be uncomfortable. And she had just recently ended a relationship with a guy who played football. She was probably not thrilled to see the football players demonized as licentious thugs. But we never really talked about the film. Maybe it was because it was too weird and close to the bone for her. I figured all hope was lost. She would not talk to me again, and now I had a sad ending to this book. The Heathers and the nerds can never really be friends, and I am a nerd forever. When I told my wife I was giving up, she said, "Try her again. Just send her some questions." And when your wife suggests you really, really try to get back in touch with your ex-girlfriend, it behooves you to do so. I sent Heather one last Hail Mary pass of an email. A couple days passed, then suddenly she wrote back with extensive notes on high school. In a thrilling entry into the careful what you wished for file, she also scanned several love letters I'd written to her and had sent them to me. Seems that aside from my anger issues, I was pretty romantic guy, pretty ambitious, fond of misspelling SAT words. My mom apparently barged in on us in an inopportune moment, and pretty nuts about her in my distant and detached way. A sample quote. "At any rate, have a neat time in Connecticut. I'll probably give you a ring on Friday, that being our anniversary and all." This sentence was followed by 8 one-eyed happy faces. That's me in a horrible, horrible nutshell. First of all, John, you're definitely going to call her. And look at how cool we're trying to sound. Give you a ring? Yeah, John. Why don't you drop her a line? Toss her a jingle. Why don't you guard your feelings in archaic slang? You're crazy about this girl. How crazy? You're commemorating an 8-week anniversary? And then you undercut that with your one-eyed happy faces. You're ridiculous. Have an unusual day iconography. Reading these letters is like smelling your own farts times infinity. Heather and I had classes together, on and off, all during high school. But I guess we really started talking a volleyball PE elective in my senior year. As I said to her in a recent email, I will die wondering how I managed to woo you in a physical education class, especially one where I had to wear plastic gloves over my glasses. I kept taking volleyballs to the face. Sexy. Asked her out and we went to see The Naked Gun. Funny, sure, but go ahead and find a less sultry date movie. And then went back to her house and watched something else. I want to say Harold and Maude, cue Cat Stevens mixtape she made for me. So she was beautiful, and she loved the holy writ of quirky teenager movies. She remembers feeling the very romantic and engaged during our time together. I remember it that way too, and I specifically recall a long walk near Tavern on the Green in Central Park after fresh snowfall. where the ground crunched under our feet, and the city kept its voice down for half an hour. She also stuck around when I was incapacitated for a week after having my wisdom teeth out. Even invited me over when I had been unable to brush my teeth for a week. Basically, our relationship is more of proof that JD's thesis, different social groups can only get along in heaven, is simply wrong, or at least simplistic. A stop at the Snappy Snack Shack. An email interview with Heather number 2. Heather number 2 lives in the mid-Atlantic states. Since I have to use her real first name, I'm trying to keep this as anonymous as possible. Where she raises 3 really beautiful children with her husband, a doctor. She taught special education in the local public school district before resigning to spend more time with her children. Among many revelations she shared in our recent correspondence was the sad news that our high school was closing. After a test cheating scandal, declining test scores, despite all that cheating, the scores still went down, and a dip in the student interest in attending the school, the Department of Education will close the high school for the humanities in June of 2012. On public school in general. My initial response to folks who asked me about high school is that I learned then the immense value of going to school with people who are very different from myself. I had a health class one semester, and there was an ongoing exchange of ideas on parenting and culture. I met kids from all over the place. It was fascinating. I didn't love the early dismissals because of gang activities, and it was unfortunate that I once had my report card burned out with a cigarette by a loser acquaintance who took issue with my high grades, but it was still an intriguing place. I never got contraband using stolen credit cards, but I was sometimes excited by the low-level criminal of a bunch of guys in my homeroom. I had a handful of exceptional teachers who made me excited about learning, and that's a good thing. To this day, I'm committed to public school education for my kids. I know it won't be necessarily the best education out there, but I've realized education takes many forms. E.g., recently, when driving by Red Lobster, my 7-year-old exclaimed, "Red Lobster! That's where Jasmine," a classmate, "is going when her dad gets out of jail." There was no judgment. He was just stating a fact. On our high school in particular. High school was hard for me to navigate. I had a good deal of acquaintances, but not many close friends. My sense is that people often assumed I was a conformist at humanities, but I definitely was not. I did not really fit in anywhere. I'd be curious to know your recollection of me. Looking back, it seems strange that I was so out of place. I'm still close with Teresa, who was my best friend at humanities. She's really the only person other than you who I'm still in touch with. She refuses to touch Facebook, and I understand her distance. It's fun and entertaining, but also grossly voyeuristic and often vapid. Anyway, Teresa always tried to reassure me that my lack of friends and my inability to relate to many of my peers was because I was an old soul. I basically skipped a lot of the silliness of adolescence. Maybe that's why I liked and still like silly people like you. By silly, I mean people who are easy to laugh and make light of life. My other thoughts on why I had a hard time fitting in are that I can be very shy and self-conscious. College was not much better than high school. At her Northeastern Liberal Arts College, I was the nerd at a party school of drunkards. I had a few good friends and a long-term boyfriend for most of my time, but the social side of college was mostly a drag. In the end, I graduated Phi Beta Kappa and President's Fellow, top senior in my major, psychology. On her recollection of Heather's. Until you reminded me, I had no recollection that you and I had seen it together. I do remember that I never really liked the movie. For obvious reasons, I didn't like that the name Heather was getting such a bad rap. Footnote. At the time, I remember her saying the film was misnamed. She always seemed to have a problem with girls named Kim. I've always loved my name because it's part of my Scottish heritage, and the Scots are proud. My mom picked the name because she said it. Could never sound harsh, even in anger. And she had a beautiful image of rolling hills with purple heather. Is it any wonder I love Jane Austen? The other reason I didn't like the film, and this is digging back into my very poor memory, is that it was mean spirited. I just don't care for mean spirited stories. I guess we all have our revenge fantasies, and they're healthy in their way, but I never got a kick out of that movie. So there you have it. She wasn't really that close with the group in the full page yearbook ad. Heather, beautiful, smart, well liked, was shy and self conscious. She felt like absolutely everybody left out of high school. Daniel Waters is quick to point out that when people talk about the movie, they almost always claim to be Veronica. Is it because everyone flatters themselves? Or is it just because we're all a little out of sorts, a little above and a little below the strata we find ourselves near? Do the Heathers all feel like they're Veronicas? Or are we all Veronicas because we simply cannot deal with the fact that we're Martha Dumptrucks? What a waste. Oh, the humanity. Aftermath. The Edgar Awards are given by the mystery writers of America to works that excel within the crime genre. The term mystery is applied loosely. Anything concerning crime and its practitioners is eligible. In 1998, Daniel Waters won Edgar Award for Best Screenplay. Heathers in this pantheon alongside other winners in the Heat of the Night, Pulp Fiction, Silence of the Lambs, and Chinatown. The films just mentioned also won or were nominated for the Best Picture Oscar in their respective years. The then very young Independent Spirit Awards honored Michael Lehman and Denise Deneuve for Best First Feature. Britain's fun film magazine Empire has since put Heathers at number 412 in its list of 500 greatest movies of all time, nestled between Spider-Man 2 and Finding Nemo. And most importantly, people's eyes lit up when they heard I was working on this book. No one has said anything to the effect of, why that book? I can't mention an ex-girlfriend without talking about the movie we saw together. Patricia and I saw Sid and Nanny on 2 separate dates. Heather number 1, a double feature of Diva and Last Tango in Paris at the Revival House, and Annie, the girlfriends after Heather number 2. Well, Jesus, we saw a million films. We were together for 9 years before we realized that, we saw Rose Trotch go fish in Sally Porter's Orlando together, so that should make it pretty clear what she realized. But honest to God, I think Heathers was the first film that I viewed as a text. That's saying something. I saw Seven Samurai, Citizen's Kane, Annie Hall, and The Bicycle Thief before I saw Heathers, and I guess I viewed them as entertainment. Even The Bicycle Thief. Heathers was the first film that said to me, wait, this has to be read, chewed, digested, dissected. This is not passive craft. You have responsibilities that go beyond eating popcorn and cleaning up yourself after. You have weight to pull here. You can start by figuring out what these colors mean. So sure, it's not the only movie I could write a book about, but it's the first. But still, why Heathers? After I graduated from college, I moved back in with my mom in the little Hell's Kitchen apartment. Applied for a job in my old high school, got it, and went to work that fall as a teacher. My degree was in English, but English teachers kind of grow on trees, so I taught 3 sections of English as a second language and 2 sections of special education language arts. Most of my old teachers were still there, with the notable exception of Mr. Padroni, whose molestation charges were pending. He'd been put on administrative leave at the Board of Ed in Brooklyn. But my art teacher, my old bio teacher, a bunch of the English faculty, All of them were still at humanities, and all of them were incredibly welcoming to former students who was now a colleague. I got drunk for the first time ever after grueling, depressing evening of parent-teacher conferences, where 5 parents showed up, representing 5 of my 8 students. A bunch of us, my old art teacher, my old science teacher, 2 of my old English teachers, and me, went down to Jekyll and Hyde, an incredibly cheesy Victorian horror-themed bar in the West Village. It's probably the least gay West Village bar because it's so goddamn tacky. The drinks started pouring, and I had participated in school's blood drive that day, so I got extra drunk, extra fast. Soon enough, the shit-talking started, with the teachers talking smack about the hacks who didn't teach, clicking their tongues at losers who were only working still because they had tenure, and bitching about the department heads who called themselves stupidvisors. It continued at a faculty meeting where this group, myself included, staked out a place at the back of the library, snickering during the principal's long-winded speech and rolling our eyes at the teacher with the 10 unheard of habit carrying a mobile telephone on his belt. He used it to call the parents of unruly students. In 1993, there were clearly very cool teachers and not cool teachers, and the makings of cool were the same at this level. Chalk on your butt? Not cool. Went scuba diving on spring break? Cool. Out drinking on a school night? Cool. Staying in to grade papers? Nerd. Late in the school year, I was told that budget cuts made it impossible for the school to retain me. Just before this news came down, a second-year senior took a swing at me for touching his backpack. If he'd connected, I doubt I'd be able to write anything. So I left the school without argument, declined another teaching job in the Bronx, and started a vague 20-something life of tempting across the city in horrible, tight-assed offices. I honestly think I tempt in every industry the city has to offer. Fashion, accounting, pharmaceuticals, you name it. I put on a ghastly khaki and tie combination and gave them a timesheet, and everywhere it was the same. There were cool partners, all the too eager associates, the tread-upon administrative assistants, all of them treated like children by their peers, which is to say, treated like adults. I am no closer to finding the answers to my questions. Who am I in this film? Why does it speak to me? I've met a few football players at camp, but I only had to put up with them for a month. The pretty girls were aloof, but never really mean. To my face, anyways. New York is its own little world, with unique rules that don't apply elsewhere in the country. Again, I took a date to the opera, and that was sort of cool. The film is a satire, and the characters are broad and silly. Most cult movies deal with broader archetypes. Any stern, highbrow essay on the Rocky Horror Picture Show will illuminate this idea better than I ever could. We're not supposed to see ourselves directly in Heathers, just see the heightened versions of our tendencies. We're all Peter Dawsons and Heathers and JDs and Braces. And it doesn't matter. I have been asking the wrong question. It's less, who was I, than who will my daughter be? She's almost 4. We're raising her in Los Angeles. My wife and I have to be here for work since our skill set, acting, is less useful in, say, Detroit or Memphis. It's a status-conscious city. Los Angeles and I worry that my daughter will fall under yellow box shoes of peers, or whatever the fashionable shoe will be when she starts high school in 2021. Will she be a Betty Finn, caught up in her study, loveless? A Martha Dumtrick, so hapless that she botches a suicide attempt? Or worse, will she be part of the problem? Will she be wearing the future hot shoes, pressing it into the scalp of those beneath her? Right now, she's sweet, incredibly articulate, and very gentle. But she's also a manipulator. She'll call through the baby monitor, "Mommy, I want to sit on the couch." When that doesn't work, she tries a different tack. "Mommy, I want to kiss." Does this foreshadow the future devious behavior? Getting people to forge notes for her? Ruling the school with an iron fist closed over French tip nails? And my son, younger by 2 years, is a brute. A smiling, funny brute. Already more mobile than my daughter was at this age. The way he beats at my wife while she's breastfeeding makes it look like her chest owed him money. Chess and checkers. It's never an issue of what they are going to inherit. It's the world they are going to create. I don't really want her to be an actor. I don't really want him to be a writer. But I want them to be happy and fulfilled and get excited to get out of bed most mornings. I want what every parent wants, for my children to have a better, more stable, and less terrifying lives than I did. I want my daughter to have friends that she can trust, to date guys or girls who loan her good books. And I want her to get drunk exactly once in the 8th grade, pay for it with devastating hangover, and then never touch the stuff again until she's in her 20s. I don't want her to kill or be killed, but she should absolutely 100% kill if the choice is binary, and I don't want her to fall for the bad boys, perceived or otherwise. I want him to be picked early for teams and stand up straight, and to never ever raise his hand in anger against a woman, and to tear up the end of a cinema paradiso. And I want them to know that I will absolutely love them no matter what, even if they violate every edict I just laid down. For a while there, when my daughter went to bed, I would do something that my wife made me stop doing. I would whisper, "I approve of you." So she'd never make any decision based on of the feeling that she didn't have her father's approval. My wife found this creepy, and will I be able to show them Heathers? To prove that their anger is normal, but that its end result, the revenge fantasies that they naturally harbor, are counterproductive, absurd, and ultimately laughable? Or will there be other ways of showing them? The hopes of a Heather sequel are squashed. Fed liquid drainer, according to a movie line headline from the 2009. But plans for a musical based on the film continue apace. Songs have been written, readings have been staged. It's freely adapted from the film, but not so free that you won't recognize it. Act 2 has a rousing gospel called My Dead Gay Son. I'll repeat myself. Seth Walsh, a 13-year-old in a small town in Tehachapi, California, just south of the slightly larger town of Bakersfield, had been pulled out of his junior high in order to be homeschooled. The harassment and bullying that he faced by being an out-of-the-closet teen had grown too much. But leaving the school apparently didn't help. You probably know the end of the story. Seth went home after one too many days of being insulted in the playground and hung himself, and died 9 days later. The news, of course, got worse. In this age of 24-hour news cycle, suicide proved nationally contagious. Within the next month, 4 more gay teens had killed themselves. As of this writing, bullying of all sorts is being seriously addressed in high school campuses across the country in what seems like an unprecedented, rise in concern? Outpouring of empathy. Bullying is a vaguely defined term and is not illegal. It's just a cruel part of social Darwinism that can run rampant when unchecked. The kids who hassled Seth Walsh, the kids who badgered Asher Brown until he shot himself in the head in Texas, not criminals, any of them, just misguided pricks with absent parents. There is no legal recourse, but I'm comforted by the preventive quality of the It Gets Better videos. When celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres to the sitting president of the United States get on TV to tell harassed kids from the other side that bullying is temporary and that it is born of inadequacies of the bullies, it might carry more weight than any sort of judgmental different. As the ending of Heathers hopefully, if satirically, extinguishes the flame of high school class war, just maybe these videos and testimonials will bring the perspective that is so needed when it seems as if the world and all of its inhabitants are closing in on our heads. That said, there is an apparent need for such solace to be accompanied by real mediocre pop songs. It the It Gets Better tune that closes George Takei's console, four-mouthed PSA is the sort of mundane folk pop that proves what we all fear. Life might not always be high school, but the world will always speak to high school students in the same way.